Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought an old attic could make my heart pound like it did. I figured I'd spend a week or two fixing this place, then get it ready for sale. That was the plan when I first stepped through the front door. I didn't expect to stand in total darkness every night, dripping sweat, shaking a flashlight at dusty boxes and hearing laughter that sounded like it came from nowhere. I arrived on a Sunday morning with my pickup filled with tools, paint cans, and a couple of folding tables. The drive was quiet, and the house sat at the end of a narrow street. Most of the neighbors were older folks who'd lived there for decades. I pulled up to the curb, turned off the engine, and stared at the house my grandmother had left me. She'd owned it for years, renting it out to different people, but now it sat vacant. I needed to fix it up and sell it. Simple enough. The exterior looked worn. The paint was peeling and the windows were caked with dirt. The porch steps groaned under my weight. I walked inside, flicked on the main light switch, and heard a faint buzz. The ceiling light in the living room came on, giving off a weak glow. Dust motes floated in the stale air. The place smelled like old carpet and leftover dampness. I set my keys on the small table in the hallway and immediately noticed the silence. No traffic sounds, no voices, nothing. That kind of quiet felt unnatural to me, but I brushed it off. It was a small neighborhood with older residents. Of course it would be quiet. I spent the first few hours taking inventory of what needed work. The kitchen countertops were outdated, but sturdy. The plumbing in the main bathroom seemed fine. The living room walls had cracks in the drywall. The bedrooms upstairs had old carpet that I planned to rip out and replace with laminate. Then there was the attic. I knew I had to check the roof beams and insulation, see if there was any sign of leaks or rot. I pushed open the attic hatch, pulled down the folding ladder, and climbed up. It was hot up there. Dusty, too. A single bulb with a pulled chain hung from the rafters. I switched it on and saw a cluster of boxes along the far wall. The roof's interior frame looked decent at first glance. There was some discoloration near one corner, but no obvious leaks. I remember the first time I heard that odd laughter. It was a quiet night, maybe around midnight. I was in the living room finishing a sandwich, the only noise coming from the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Then I heard this short burst of giggles. It was muffled, like it came from above. I stood still, holding my plate, and listened. It faded in seconds. My first thought was, maybe I just imagined it. I was tired. My mind was on edge from all the cleaning and repairs. I decided to ignore it. The next day, I hauled a bunch of painting supplies to the first bedroom. The walls needed fresh paint, and I wanted to start early. By the afternoon, I was covered in dust and paint splatters. I installed a new ceiling fan in the living room, replaced a few cracked tiles in the bathroom, and generally kept busy. By the time I sat down for dinner, it was nearly 8 p.m. I ate some takeout, scrolled through my phone, and thought about my schedule for the next day. Around 11 p.m., I decided to go up to the attic again and check the beams more carefully. I carried a flashlight and climbed the ladder, careful with each step. It was dark up there, even with the bulb on, because the light was weak and the corners remained in shadow. I started to shine the flashlight along the wooden supports. I tapped them to see if they sounded solid. Everything seemed normal, just dusty and old. Then I heard a soft giggle. It sounded like 2 or 3 distinct voices, but I couldn't see anyone around. My skin prickled. My chest tightened. I spun around with the flashlight, sweeping the beams and the floor. There were only cardboard boxes, some stacked, some tipped over. My mouth went dry. I told myself it might be the wind or some odd echo from outside. But I knew that laughter didn't sound like wind. It sounded like something close, something right there. My heart thumped as I waited. Everything went quiet. I exhaled, shook off the feeling, and climbed down to the hallway. I barely slept that night. I lay on the old mattress in one of the bedrooms, staring at the ceiling, listening for any noise. Every time I started to drift off, I imagined I heard a faint giggle. My body felt tense. My stomach churned. I wasn't exactly scared, but I couldn't relax. I kept telling myself it was just in my head or maybe some strange acoustics in the attic. But I couldn't ignore how real it had sounded. The following day, I tried to forget about it by focusing on more repairs. I tore out the old carpet from the bedrooms, sealed up some cracks in the foundation near the laundry room, and replaced a broken window pane in the garage. By dusk, my arms ached, my back was sore, and my throat was dry from breathing in dust. I drank a bottle of water, stood in the backyard, and looked up at the roof. I considered the possibility of animals living up there, maybe raccoons or something that could make weird noises. But that laughter didn't sound like animals. It sounded human, like a few voices teasing each other with short bursts of giggles. That night, I prepared to go up there again. I told myself I needed to confirm if there was some pest problem. So, around 10 p.m., I grabbed a heavier flashlight, a small tool bag, and climbed into the attic. The air was stuffy, and I coughed on the dust. I tried stepping carefully, but the old boards creaked with every move. I aimed the flashlight at the corners, checking for signs of nests or droppings. I didn't see anything that would indicate animals. I didn't see anything at all, just boxes. Some were marked with labels like winter clothes or old dishes. Others were unmarked. I was about to open one when I heard scurrying behind me. I turned so fast I almost lost my balance. My breath caught in my throat. I heard footsteps, light, quick steps like someone running on the other side of the attic. Then came a single, high-pitched laugh, just a short, "Ha!" right behind me. My blood ran cold. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I aimed the flashlight toward the sound, but I saw only the dusty floor and a couple of boxes. My pulse hammered in my ears. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. My voice echoed in the rafters. I stood there, panting. I could feel my hands shaking. I walked slowly toward the spot where I thought I heard the running. My boots crunched over loose debris. The floor groaned. I kicked aside a small box and found nothing underneath. I crouched down and pointed the flashlight beam around. Nothing. My heart was racing, and all I could think was, that was right next to me. There's nowhere to hide here. After a minute, I forced myself to turn around and make my way back to the ladder. The attic felt oppressive, like it was closing in on me. I climbed down, shut the hatch, and locked every door in the house. Then I sat in the living room with the lights on, chest heaving. I tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the sound of those steps and that single laugh. It was too clear. There was no way it was an animal or a random noise. It had intention behind it, like whoever made it wanted me to hear it. My rational mind had no explanation. I'd never believed in stuff like ghosts or spirits, but I didn't have another excuse ready. Over the next few days, I kept working on the house. I replaced the old doors with new ones, patched up cracks in the walls, installed new faucets in the kitchen and bathroom. During the day, everything felt ordinary, just an old place that needed some upgrades. But at night, I dreaded going upstairs. I felt a knot in my stomach whenever I glanced at the attic hatch. The memory of that laugh got under my skin. One evening, I decided I'd just ignore the attic completely. I locked it shut, figured I'd checked the beams enough. My plan was to do the rest of the repairs downstairs, call a professional inspector if needed, and move on with my life. That worked for a day or two. Then on the next night, I was in the master bedroom touching up some paint around the window frame when I heard that laughter again. It wasn't above me this time. It sounded like it came from the hallway. High, light giggles, 2 or 3 voices all at once, lasting maybe 2 seconds. It made my skin crawl. I marched to the hallway, adrenaline pumping. I flicked on the overhead light. Nothing there, just the old hardwood floor and peeling wallpaper. The attic hatch was closed. There was no one else in the house. I shouted, "Hey, stop it!" My voice echoed down the stairs. Silence. My hands shook as I stood there feeling more confused than ever. I had to think practically. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was secured. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of squatters. The neighbor next door was in bed by 8 p.m. every night. This was the quietest part of town. Nobody was sneaking around in here. But I had no way to explain these sounds. I made up my mind to finish my tasks as fast as possible. I wanted to get out of this place. I spent the next day installing the new kitchen cabinets, fixing the porch steps, and throwing out the junk that had accumulated over the years. I worked straight through lunch. By dusk, I'd made good progress. I told myself I could wrap up everything in a couple more days. I tried to stay optimistic. Then night fell. I was in the living room checking the new electrical outlets. The air felt heavy and I was on edge. I heard a thump above me, like something dropping on the attic floor. I tried to ignore it, but my chest got tight. I felt a pulse in my temples. My curiosity won out. I picked up my flashlight and headed upstairs. I stood under the attic hatch, hand on the pull cord. My breath felt shallow. I tugged it, and the ladder unfolded. I climbed up slowly, flashlight in one hand. The attic light was off, so I pulled the chain. It flickered a bit, casting a weak glow across the rafters. I stepped forward, scanning the boxes for any movement. My footsteps sounded loud against the wooden floor. I heard a faint shuffle from the far corner. I gripped the flashlight tighter. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to walk toward that corner, stepping around boxes. The air smelled stale. I heard a light scrabbling noise, but I couldn't pinpoint where it came from. Then I caught a glimpse of something shifting behind a stack of old crates. I raised the flashlight. For a split second, I thought I saw a shape, but it was just shadows dancing on the wall. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I whispered, "I know you're here." No response. Silence. Then, behind me, the giggles came again. They sounded close and sharp. I spun around, nearly knocking into a low beam. The laughter stopped abruptly. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy. My arms tingled. The hair on my neck bristled. I waited, flashlight shaking in my hand. There was nothing to see. Nothing solid. No sign of anything that could produce those sounds. My chest tightened, and I felt my breathing quicken. I couldn't handle it anymore. I backed away toward the ladder, keeping my flashlight aimed in front of me. My shoulders were tense. My head throbbed. I climbed down, step by step, breathing hard. My feet hit the hallway floor and I slammed the hatch shut. I stood there, gulping air. Sweat trickled down my forehead. That was my last time in the attic. I decided right then I didn't care what was left undone up there. I wouldn't go back. The next morning I arranged for a local roofer to do an inspection and finalize any repairs. I would pay for the service and not bother with it myself. I spent the rest of that week finishing the downstairs projects. I installed the last bits of trim, painted the living room, and replaced the back door. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of my stay, but I kept every light on until I went to bed each night. I locked the attic hatch and left it that way. When I finally put the house on the market, I felt relief. I drove away without looking back. I don't have a neat explanation for what happened. All I know is that place felt off whenever night fell. Those strange voices, those giggles, like some invisible group was up there playing around. Maybe the next owner will never hear a thing, or maybe they will. I don't plan on finding out. I got the house sold and moved on. But I still can't shake the memory of standing there in that cramped, dusty space, hearing those laughs echo around me. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was something else. And I hope I never hear that kind of laughter again. I never liked sneaking around abandoned property. The thought of crumbling walls and silent corridors always made my stomach tighten. But I needed to see this place for myself. I'd heard about the old ceramic factory from my mother. She said my grandfather worked there as a night watchman in the 70s. The factory shut down decades ago, and the company left everything to rot. People warned me not to go inside. They said the structure was unsafe, that it attracted trouble, that there was no good reason to wander through broken machinery. I didn't care. I wanted to find something that belonged to my grandfather. I wanted to see where he spent his nights. So I parked my car across the street, shoved my hands in my jacket pockets, and walked toward the busted gate. The chain-link fence had a few missing sections. Rust covered most of it. I saw weeds sprouting through cracks in the asphalt. Broken pieces of tile and ceramic littered the ground. Some sections of the outer walls had collapsed, leaving piles of rubble around the perimeter. I stepped over the debris carefully. My heart was pounding. My footsteps felt too loud, even though there was no one around. I could taste dust in the back of my throat. The air felt cold, but I also felt sweat on my forehead. I reached the main entrance to the factory yard. The large doors were boarded up, but I'd heard there was an old security shack somewhere in the back. That's where my grandfather worked. My plan was to walk around until I found it. I didn't want to spend too long inside the main building. I'd read stories about these places. People use them for who knows what. I didn't want any unpleasant surprises. I just wanted to see the little wooden cabin where he sat all night, watching over the ceramic plant. I moved slowly along the side of the building. The walls were riddled with graffiti. Some of it was fresh, some of it had faded over the years. A few windows were shattered. I heard the crunch of ceramic shards under my boots. The place smelled like damp concrete and rot. My jacket brushed against the rough edges of the wall, making a scratching noise that made my teeth clench. I kept scanning the area, looking for anything that resembled a small guard hut. After a few minutes, I spotted a structure in the distance near a row of dead trees. It had a slanted roof and looked like it might have been part of a security checkpoint. When I got closer, I realized it was more of a shack than a real building. The paint had peeled off. The windows were mostly gone, leaving empty frames. The door hung crooked on its hinges. I paused before stepping inside. My chest felt tight. This was where my grandfather spent long nights alone. I tried to imagine him sitting at a small desk, writing notes, maybe sipping coffee. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The interior was cramped and musty. There was a single chair toppled over in the corner. A small table stood near a window, but it looked like someone had smashed it years ago. Pieces of wood lay scattered on the floor. I saw a few metal hooks on the wall, probably for hanging jackets or helmets. Old newspapers were piled in a corner. I nudged them with my foot and they practically disintegrated into dust. The place didn't look like it had been visited in a long time. I coughed a bit from the stale air. Then I saw something that looked like a small leather notebook poking out from a gap under the collapsed table. I bent down and picked it up. The cover was dirty, and the edges were worn. When I opened it, the first page had my grandfather's name scribbled in pencil. I recognized the signature from old family documents. My heart started beating faster. I swallowed hard and flipped through a few pages. Some entries were short. They mentioned times, like 1:15 a.m., nothing new, or 2 now a.m., walked perimeter. Some entries described typical night watch stuff. Lights off in main hall, locked side gate, heard stray dogs near the fence. But then I found a page that mentioned strange sounds. He wrote about hearing clanking chains echoing from deep inside the factory. He wrote about footsteps near the old caldera, the big kiln area. He was never sure if it was an animal or a person. One entry said, "Heard chain rattling again at 3:20 a.m. Can't see anyone. Feels too loud to be the wind." I felt a chill creep across my neck as I read those lines. I glanced around the shack. The wind outside was blowing softly. I could hear a gentle whistle where the walls had openings. My skin prickled. I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone, but I could see no sign of anyone. I checked the time on my phone. It wasn't late in the day, but the overcast sky made everything feel dim. I wanted to keep reading, so I sat on a wooden crate in the corner. I flipped to the middle of the notebook. There was a longer passage about a figure my grandfather claimed to see. He described it as someone hunched over walking near the big machines. He wrote that it moved slowly, dragging something across the floor. He never got a clear look. He thought maybe it was a vagrant living in the factory. The entries kept referencing that shape, or the figure by the caldera. My chest tightened. I didn't like the idea of some unknown person creeping around this place when my grandfather was here alone. I wondered if it was just his imagination, or if he really saw someone. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a piece of ceramic being kicked across the ground. The impact was sharp. I stood up fast and banged my knee on the crate. I bit my lip to keep from shouting in pain. I reached the window and peered out. I didn't see anyone. The yard was quiet. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I stayed still for a long moment. Nothing moved. The wind rustled through the dead trees. I looked back at the door. It hung there, swaying slightly. I debated whether to stay or leave. Part of me wanted to explore more. Another part of me thought I was being reckless. I went back to the crate and picked up the notebook again. My hands were shaking a bit. I scanned the entries for any more details about that figure. One passage described hearing a scraping sound near the caldera. My grandfather wrote that he followed the noise once, holding a flashlight and a wrench for protection. He said the inside of the factory was full of echoing footsteps and the rattle of chains swinging from overhead conveyors. He never found anyone, but he felt like he was being watched. He wrote, "I hate this place at night. I keep feeling a presence behind me." I flipped a few more pages. That's when I noticed some lines about how the figure sometimes stood near the windows, as if looking out at the yard. My grandfather wrote that he only saw it from the corner of his eye. It was always bent forward, like it had a bad back or was injured. My fingertips felt cold. I thought about how real this must have been for him. I also wondered if maybe he was just exhausted from working nights, imagining stuff in the darkness. My thoughts got interrupted by another sound outside. This time it was a dull thud, like something heavy dropped onto concrete. My stomach clenched. I stood up and stepped toward the window again. I felt my throat go dry. The yard still looked empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. I thought about calling a friend, but my phone signal was weak. Plus, I felt a little embarrassed about needing backup just to explore some old building. I picked up the notebook, planning to take it with me. Then I thought about how it belonged to my grandfather. It was part of this place, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to remove it. I flipped through more pages, hoping to find a final entry that would explain everything. That's when I saw sketches. They were rough pencil drawings. They showed a crouched shape with elongated arms and a hunched back. My grandfather wrote question marks around it. He wrote man or something else. I felt my muscles tense up. My breath got shallow. My mind started to race. It looked like he was truly scared of whoever or whatever this was. I heard another noise, closer this time. I dropped the notebook on the crate. My heart pounded. It sounded like footsteps crunching on broken tile just outside the shack. I froze and stared at the doorway. The door let in a sliver of light. I saw nothing. I listened for breathing, but the wind made it hard to be sure. I considered stepping out to check. Then I remembered the drawings, the figure, the accounts of chains rattling at odd hours. My nerves felt shot. I took 2 slow steps backward, keeping my eyes on the doorway. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I waited, listening for any sign that someone was about to enter. After several seconds, I heard a scuffing sound that moved away from the shack. It was like the person, or thing, was walking off in another direction. My shoulders relaxed a bit, but I was still shaking. I pressed my lips together and debated whether to investigate. Every part of me screamed to get out of there. I had enough. I'd seen enough. I grabbed the notebook off the crate and flipped the pages one last time. That's when I caught sight of a final note. It said, "I see it outside again. I don't know how long I can do this." My grandfather left those words. He must have felt isolated, trapped in this night job. I felt a surge of pity for him. Then my fear took over. I heard a metallic scraping noise somewhere behind the shack. I didn't want to meet whoever was making that noise. I didn't want to find out if it was some homeless person or something else. My face felt hot. My mouth was dry. I set the notebook back on the crate. I figured I could always come back for it if I really needed it. A part of me felt guilty for leaving it, but my instincts told me to leave everything as it was. I moved toward the doorway. My foot knocked against a piece of broken wood. It rattled across the floor. I winced, thinking I'd given myself away. I pushed the door open, inch by inch, trying not to make noise. The hinges squeaked. My stomach flipped. I paused, then forced myself to slip outside. The air felt colder. The yard was still empty, but the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. I started walking toward the fence, staying low, watching every corner of the yard. I kept expecting a hunched figure to appear behind a pile of rubble or around the corner of the main factory. My boots crunched on shattered ceramic. Each step sounded too loud. My heartbeat pounded in my head. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds. I saw rusted scaffolding, broken windows, piles of collapsed roof. I didn't see any movement. The place was silent except for the wind. I tried to keep my breathing even, but I could feel my lungs tightening. I remembered the notebook's words about footsteps in the caldera, about chains rattling. I pictured my grandfather standing in that little shack, hearing the same sounds, feeling the same tension. It took me a few minutes to reach the fence. I found the gap I'd come through. I ducked under a twisted section of chain link and stepped back onto the street. My car was still there, a short distance away. I felt relief wash over me. I looked around one last time. The factory loomed in the background, silent and abandoned. I still felt like something was watching me from the darkness inside. My hands were trembling as I reached for my car keys. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My breath came in short bursts. I told myself I was just spooked by old stories and weird noises, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my grandfather's notes were real. He heard chains. He saw a bent figure. He was convinced something was out there at night. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I started the engine and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror until the factory disappeared from sight. When I got home, I realized I hadn't taken a single picture. I also remembered I left the notebook on that crate. I felt a stab of regret, but I also felt relief. That place belonged to the past, along with everything my grandfather experienced. I sat on my couch for a long time, staring at the wall, hearing the phantom sound of crunching ceramic and scraping metal in my head. I decided I wasn't going back for the notebook. Some things can stay where they are. I had seen enough, and I sure as hell wasn't planning to return to that broken-down factory by myself again. I never thought a phone ring could make my heart pound so hard. 2 weeks ago, everything changed. I was asleep in my small apartment alone when the landline started ringing at exactly 3 a.m. I keep that phone for emergencies, but I rarely use it. People who know me call my cell. At that hour, I assumed something terrible had happened. I scrambled out of bed, rushed to the phone, and answered. All I heard was a faint static. No breathing, no words, just a crackling sound. I said hello, waited, said hello again. Nothing. I hung up. It felt strange, but not terrifying. I told myself it was probably a wrong number or a glitch in the line. I went back to bed. The next day was normal. Work was fine. I came home, cooked, watched TV, and slept. Then, at 3 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, I jumped awake the moment the phone started ringing. It was like my body had already learned to panic at that sound. I rushed over, picked up the receiver, and pressed it to my ear. Static again. It sounded like a weak radio signal. I strained to hear any voice, but all I caught was a hissing noise. I said hello a few times, waited, then heard a faint whisper. I couldn't make out words. It was more like someone breathing close to the mouthpiece. I felt a chill in my arms. I told myself it was probably some messed up connection. I hung up and tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. Over the next few nights, the calls continued, always around 3 a.m. My phone never lights up with caller ID for these calls. It always shows unknown. Each time I answered, the noise was there. Static, A low hiss or a faint whisper. I tried speaking up. I tried shouting into the phone. I tapped the receiver. I waited. Eventually, the line would go dead. It left me shaken every time. I started dreading bedtime. I tried calling the number back, but my phone service said it was non-existent. I asked them to check if there was a problem with my line. They said everything looked normal. They didn't see any record of incoming calls at that hour. I felt unease creeping in. I started turning on the living room lamp before I went to bed, just so I wouldn't have to face the dark if the phone rang. I noticed I was sleeping lightly, waking up every hour to check the time. Then came the night I heard my name. I remember sitting in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for the call. At exactly 3 wow, the phone started to ring. It was a harsh sound that cut through the quiet in my apartment. My chest tightened. I walked to the phone, picked it up, and said, "Hello?" The static was there, but I caught a rasping noise behind it. I said, "Who is this?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it. A voice whispered my name. It stretched out each syllable like it wanted me to know it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, it was personal. My hands started shaking. My voice came out in a shaky breath. I asked, "What do you want?" But there was no response, just more static. I yelled into the phone, but it didn't change anything. I hung up. My heart was beating so hard I thought I might pass out. I felt sweat running down my neck. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on my couch, lights on, phone in front of me, waiting to see if it would ring again. I thought about unplugging the phone, but every time I reached for the cord, something stopped me. It was a pull, like I needed to know what was happening. Maybe I was scared that if I unplugged it, I'd miss an explanation or some clue about who was calling me. Or maybe I was just too frozen to make a clear decision. Instead, I waited for daylight, then went to work. I spent the whole day feeling jumpy and exhausted. I told a friend at work about it. He laughed it off and said it had to be a prank. I thought that might be true, but who would do it every single night at the same time? And how could the phone company find no record of the calls? When I got home, I tried to distract myself by cleaning. My apartment is small, so that didn't take long. I turned on the TV and tried to focus on any show that could pull me out of my head. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. on purpose. I sat at my small kitchen table, phone within reach. I wanted to be mentally prepared. I set my cell phone to record, hoping to catch the sound. At exactly 3, the landline rang. I waited 2 rings, then answered. I kept my cell phone close to the receiver to record. Again, static. I said hello. After a few seconds, I heard the whisper. It said my name once more. My entire body tensed. I felt my heart hammer in my ears. "Who the hell is this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Nothing." Then I heard a strange noise like something being dragged on a floor, followed by a dull thump. I asked again, "Who are you?" The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone for a minute, not sure what to do. I checked my cell phone recording. It captured static, my voice, and maybe a faint hiss, but I couldn't clearly hear the whisper. It was too distorted. I tried to get some sleep, but my brain kept racing. I wondered if someone was outside my door messing with the phone line. I checked the hallway, checked the locks, even opened my apartment door to look around. Everything was quiet. My neighbors were asleep. The building hallway was empty. I closed my door, locked it, and went back to my couch. I turned on the TV and left it on for background noise. I felt safer with some light and sound around me. For the next few nights, the calls persisted. Each time it was the same static, the faint hiss, and sometimes the voice saying my name. I started to feel worn down. My eyes had circles under them. My head felt cloudy. At work, people asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was dealing with insomnia. I didn't want to sound crazy. At home, I considered ignoring the calls, but the ring was too jarring. My curiosity also kept me on edge. One evening, I decided to call the phone company again and demand they trace the next call. The representative told me they could only do that with a police request. I thought about calling the police, but I felt strange doing that for a series of unknown calls. Nobody was threatening me directly. There were no explicit words besides my name, but it felt like a violation. I felt targeted. I also tried an old trick. I picked up the phone and pressed different keys while the static was there, hoping to disrupt the line or annoy whoever was on the other end. Nothing changed. The whisper, if it was there, stayed calm. Sometimes I could hear a faint tapping noise. Sometimes it was just a hiss. My chest would tighten. My palms would sweat. My stomach would churn. I began to associate the phone's ring with a sense of dread. On the 10th night, I think, I tried to be more aggressive. I waited for the call, and when I heard the static, I said, "I'm not afraid of you. Say something real or stop calling." For a second, it was silent, then the voice whispered, "Listen." I froze. It was the first time I heard a different word. I asked, "Listen to what?" Then there was a metallic scraping sound. It lasted a few seconds and made my ears hurt. I shouted at the phone, but the line clicked off. My head was pounding. I felt my legs shaking. I tried to calm my breathing, but my chest was so tight I had to sit down. I stayed on the floor, heart racing, mind blank. The next day I skipped work. I was too tired and unsettled. I tried to sleep in the morning when the sun was out. My phone stayed silent during the day. That's the pattern. It never rings at any time except 3 a.m. I woke up around noon feeling groggy and tense. I decided to investigate. I went down to the building's front desk and asked if any maintenance had been in the phone room. They said no. I asked if there were any electrical issues. They said everything was fine. I had nowhere else to look. I sat in the lobby for a while just to avoid going back to my apartment. That night the phone rang again at 3. This time I picked up immediately. Static. I tried to stay calm and asked, "What do you want from me?" I waited. The static grew louder, then I heard what sounded like faint breathing. My name came through again, drawn out and slow. I felt my pulse in my neck. My mouth went dry. I asked, "Why are you doing this?" More static, then a soft clicking noise. I waited. A few seconds passed. Nothing else came through, so I hung up. I started to think I might be losing it. I tested my phone with a friend by having him call at various times. The phone worked fine. Caller ID displayed normally for his calls. No problems at all. I even recorded a few regular calls to compare them to the static calls. Everything was normal except for those 3 a.m. calls. I tried reading about paranormal stuff online, but that just made me more anxious. I'm not a believer in ghosts or anything like that, but I ran out of logical explanations. I moved the phone from my living room table to my kitchen counter. I thought maybe a different spot would change something. It didn't. At 3 a.m., the ring sounded from the kitchen, echoing through the apartment. The calls never missed a single night. Sometimes the whispering was softer. Sometimes it was louder. Sometimes it said my name. Sometimes I only caught breathing. I never heard any other words except that one time it said, "Listen." A few days ago, I almost cut the line completely. I stared at the phone jack, hand on the cord, heart racing. But I couldn't do it. Something in me wanted to know who or what was calling. I thought maybe the next call would reveal something. Maybe the whisper would turn into a normal voice. Maybe I could trace it somehow. But I never got more than static and that hiss. Last night I sat in front of the phone before 3 a.m. I had a notepad ready. I planned to write down anything I heard, even the weird noises. Right on schedule, the phone rang. I picked up and held my breath. Static. Then a hiss. I heard the voice whisper my name, then a burst of static. I whispered, "I'm here. I'm listening." There was a slow rasping sound, like someone dragging something across a rough surface. My hand shook and I felt sweat on my forehead. I tried to keep still. I heard the voice again, but it was faint. It could have been saying something, but it was too distorted. I thought I heard it say my name again, but I wasn't sure. Then the line went dead. I hung up and stared at my notes. All I had were random scribbles. My handwriting was shaky and made no sense. I felt a wave of anxiety rolling through my chest. My heart was racing. My eyes felt tired, but my mind was spinning. I realized I'd been clenching my jaw. My teeth hurt. I tried to stand, and my legs felt weak. I drank a glass of water and paced around my apartment. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Now I'm sitting here, writing this down. It's late. The phone is on the counter, silent for now, but I know it will ring again at 3. My shoulders are tense. My stomach feels like it's in knots. I have a decision to make. I can cut the line and end these calls, or I can keep answering and hope something changes. So far, I haven't had the courage to pull the plug. Part of me wants to know who's behind this. Part of me is terrified. But every night I pick up the phone anyway. I'm tired and on edge, but I can't stop. It's like I need to hear that static. I need to hear that whisper. I need to see if it finally says something more. I don't know what I'm expecting to happen. Maybe there's no explanation. But I can't ignore it. The phone is right there and the ringing won't stop. I want to pretend everything is normal, but it's not. My apartment feels different now. The space is the same, but the silence isn't peaceful anymore. I keep waiting for that piercing ring, and at 3 a.m. it always comes. I answer because I have to. I answer because some part of me thinks the next call might be the key to understanding why this is happening. Until then, I wait, my heart pounding, eyes on the clock, dreading that moment when the phone starts to ring again. I wasn't ready for the banging overhead. My first night in this new apartment, I felt exhausted from carrying boxes up the stairs. It's a small building with only 3 floors, and I'm on the top one. There's no elevator, so I hauled everything myself. By the time I finished, it was around 11 at night. That's when I heard it. Heavy, deliberate footsteps above me. It sounded like someone pacing back and forth, occasionally dragging something across the floor. The noise sent a jolt through my body. I remember standing in the middle of my living room, sweating from the move, trying to catch my breath, and then hearing this thud, thud, thud right above my head. The building manager, Mr. Silva, told me nobody had access to the roof. There's a locked door leading to the maintenance area, which also serves as the top floor's utility space. He told me not to worry about it because there was nothing up there except old pipes and wiring. He made it sound impossible for anyone to be there at night, but every evening around the same time I heard it. The pacing started slowly, built up for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then stopped. Sometimes there was a loud scraping sound, like a chair or a large object being dragged. It made the ceiling vibrate. My stomach would knot up each time it happened. I'd stare up, waiting for it to end, thinking maybe it was an illusion or that my neighbor downstairs was making noise that somehow echoed up. But that explanation never made sense because the footsteps sounded way too close, right above me, not below. After a few days of this, I decided to talk to Mr. Silva again. I approached him while he was unlocking the main door one morning. I tried to keep my voice calm and said, "I'm hearing footsteps at night, around 11. Are you sure no one goes up to the roof?" He looked at me with a tired expression. He said, "Yes, I'm sure. The door's locked, and I'm the only one with a key. I haven't opened it in months. Maybe sounds carry through the pipes. These old buildings can be weird." I felt a prickle on the back of my neck when he said that. I had no reason to doubt him, but I also couldn't ignore what I heard. I thanked him, walked away, and thought about the possibility of the building's pipes making those sounds. It seemed unlikely, but I tried to convince myself that might be the case. That night I sat in my living room with the TV muted around 10:30. I wanted to be ready to listen carefully. The building was quiet. My neighbor below me was a single guy named Paulo. I had met him once in the hallway. He seemed nice but kept to himself. He mentioned that the walls were thin and to let him know if I heard anything weird. I thought about going down and asking him if he'd been hearing the same footsteps, but I decided to wait. I wanted to confirm I wasn't imagining things. At exactly 11, I heard it again. The first footstep was soft, then the next one was heavier. My heart started racing. I turned off the lights. I wanted to stand perfectly still and track the direction of the noise. It was moving in a line above my bedroom, then turning around near what I assumed was the far corner of the roof. Then it came back. It was like someone pacing in a cramped area. Occasionally, I heard a scraping noise. It reminded me of a piece of furniture or a big box being dragged across concrete. I stood there, eyes fixed on the ceiling. My breath got shallow. The footsteps went on for almost 10 minutes. Then it stopped. My heart pounded in my ears. I sat down on my couch. Sweat trickled down my forehead. Even though the room was cool, I felt hot, like I'd just run up the stairs again. I told myself, I need to figure this out. I couldn't sleep much that night. Every time I drifted off, I imagined someone walking just a few feet above my head. The next day, I cornered Paolo in the hallway. He was taking out some trash. I asked him, "Hey, do you ever hear footsteps at night?" Paolo looked puzzled. He said, "You mean from the roof?" "No, I never hear anything. Sometimes I hear you moving around upstairs, but that's it." I explained that I'd been hearing something coming from above my bedroom. He shrugged and said, "I don't hear it down here. Maybe it's just the old pipes." I couldn't tell if he was being honest or just didn't want to get involved. His expression seemed sincere, though. I felt more unsettled. If it was loud enough to rattle my ceiling, why wouldn't he hear something? For the rest of the week, the pattern continued. The footsteps started around 11, lasted several minutes, then stopped. Sometimes I tried to ignore it by playing loud music or watching TV. But whenever I turned off the noise, I could still hear them. My chest would tighten. I'd swallow hard, trying not to let it affect me. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to see the access door myself. So one night around midnight, I climbed the final set of stairs leading to the locked door. I carried a small flashlight. The air was stale and hot. The corridor smelled like old paint and dust. The door itself looked rusted at the edges. There was a padlock on it. The lock had a thick layer of dust. There were no footprints or handprints on the door. The entire area seemed like nobody had touched it for a long time. Yet the footsteps continued right above me. I pressed my ear to the door. At first I heard nothing. After a minute, there was a single thud. My pulse sped up. I aimed my flashlight around the door frame, checking for gaps. The frame was sealed except for a few tiny cracks. I tried to look through one crack. I couldn't see anything except darkness. Then I heard another footstep. It was heavier. It sounded maybe a few feet away from where I stood, on the other side of the door. I felt a surge of fear in my chest. My hand shook a bit, and the flashlight wobbled against the door. I whispered, "Is someone there?" There was no response. The footsteps continued for a few more seconds. Then they stopped. I backed away, nearly tripping on the top step. I went back to my apartment, heart pounding. I locked my door and double-checked the chain. I tried to calm down. I didn't know what to do next. If Mr. Silva said it's locked and he hasn't been up there, who else has a key? Could someone have a copy? I couldn't imagine why anyone would sneak onto a roof late at night to pace around. It didn't make sense. But the sound was real. My plan for the next day was to confront Mr. Silva again and demand to check the roof with him. I needed to see it in the daytime and confirm there was nothing up there. That next morning, I woke up early and went straight to his door. He answered, looking half asleep. I said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but this is serious. I hear footsteps every single night around 11. Last night I went up to the door and it's locked, but I heard the noises through the door. Please, can we go up together to check?" He blinked a few times and rubbed his eyes. He said, "All right, but let's do it later. I have to run errands now. Meet me at 6 in the evening and we'll go up there." I agreed. I spent the day feeling restless. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to watch TV, tried to make lunch, but my mind kept drifting. I kept looking at the clock, waiting for 6. When the time finally came, I met Mr. Silva by the stairs. He brought a key ring with several old keys. We climbed up to that final door. The hallway felt muggy. My throat felt dry. He fiddled with the locks, muttering that it had been a while since he opened it. Eventually, he found the right key for the padlock, slid it off, then used another key for the door itself. The metal creaked. Dust and cobwebs fell from the top of the frame. The smell inside was stale. We stepped through into a small utility area. There were old buckets, a few brooms, and some large pipes running along the walls. I scanned every corner. Everything was covered in dust. We found another door that led to the open roof. It was also locked. Mr. Silva opened it with some effort. Outside, there was the exposed roof. It was flat, with a few vents and a small water tank in one corner. The sun was still up, lighting the entire surface. I saw footprints in the dust, but they looked old and scattered. Some might have been from construction workers from months or years ago. There was no sign of recent activity. No fresh footprints, no chairs, no tables. Mr. Silva and I walked the entire perimeter of the roof. He even opened the door to the water tank area, and we found nothing but some rusted tools inside. It all looked abandoned. We returned to the corridor. I inspected the floor there, looking for footprints or signs that someone had moved around recently, but the dust was undisturbed. I felt a swirl of relief and frustration. If it was so clear that nobody had been up here, why did I keep hearing those footsteps every night? Mr. Silva closed and locked everything again. He looked at me and said, "I'm telling you, it's probably the building's pipes. I don't know what else to say." He handed me his business card and said if it happened again, I should record it on my phone. Then he walked back downstairs, leaving me alone in the dimly lit hallway. My hands were trembling a bit from a mix of adrenaline and confusion. I forced myself to go back to my apartment. That night, I waited again. At 11, I heard the footsteps. They were just as loud as before. Thump, thump, thump. My mind started racing. I grabbed my phone and hit record, pointing the microphone toward the ceiling. After a few minutes, the steps stopped. I played back the recording and heard faint thuds. It was too soft to prove anything. It didn't capture how loud it felt in person. After the 5th or 6th time that I heard those footsteps, I stopped going to bed early. I stayed up past midnight, hoping to gather the courage to investigate further. One night I decided to stand on a chair in my bedroom to press my ear against the ceiling. I actually placed my palm on the ceiling to feel the vibration. At exactly 11, it started. Each step sent a small vibration through the concrete. I felt it under my hand. My pulse quickened. I could feel my stomach tighten. My breathing got rapid, and I started to sweat. There was no doubt in my mind that a person, or something with weight, was walking overhead. After about 7 or 8 steps, it paused. Then the scraping noise started. It felt like it was right above me, maybe a couple of feet to the right. I jumped down from the chair, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door. I wanted to catch whoever was up there in the act. I sprinted up the final flight of stairs. I arrived at the locked door, nearly slipping on the last step. I yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. The padlock was firmly in place. I put my ear against the metal door. My heart was thundering in my chest. I heard movement on the other side. It was heavier than footsteps now. It sounded like someone was dragging something across the floor. The sound caused my arms to break out in goosebumps. I tried to see through the cracks again, but the corridor was dark. I couldn't see any light or shadow. My mind raced with questions. Who had locked themselves in there? Why would they do this every night at the same time? I tried to knock on the door. My knuckles hurt against the metal. I said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The noise continued for a few seconds. Then everything went dead silent. I stood there for what felt like a long time, waiting to see if it would start again. It didn't. I walked back to my apartment feeling a mix of anger and fear. I locked my door and leaned against it, trying to process what just happened. My heart was still pounding. My muscles felt tense, like I was ready to either fight or run away. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? I'm hearing footsteps on a locked roof. They'd probably laugh at me. Also, I had no sign of a crime. There was just noise. I paced around my living room, checking the ceiling, half expecting it to collapse. Around midnight, I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing the echo of those footsteps in my head. The next morning, I told Mr. Silva about the new recording attempt and the fresh incident. He said, "If you're that sure someone's sneaking up there, maybe we should change the locks. I can do that tomorrow." I nodded and waited. The next day, he swapped out the padlock with a brand new one. He let me watch him open it, remove it, and put the new one in place. The old corridor door lock stayed the same, but the padlock was fresh. That night, at 11, I braced myself. The footsteps returned, just as loud, same pattern, same scraping. I stayed in bed this time, paralyzed by confusion and frustration. There was a new lock, it made no difference. Now I lie here each night, listening to those footsteps. They always start around the same time, as if by a schedule. They pace, they drag something, they vanish. I've tried everything except breaking down the door, but that wouldn't be my right, and I don't want to deal with the consequences of damaging the building's property. I still talk to Mr. Silva often. He's out of answers. He thinks I'm either overreacting or there's some weird building quirk, yet he doesn't doubt I'm hearing something. He just can't explain it. I live with this tension every day. Sometimes, if I come home late, I wonder if I'll bump into whoever's responsible on the stairs. But I never see anyone suspicious. There are only two of us living in this building, Paolo and me. Paolo works long hours. He denies going anywhere near the roof. Mr. Silva lives off-site. I checked the building records and there's no sign of a third tenant. The footsteps remain a mystery. Every time I close my eyes at night, I know they'll start soon. And every time I hear them, my body tenses up. My mind races with questions. I get up, stand under the ceiling, and feel my breath shake. The noise continues, slowly pacing back and forth. Then it stops, leaving me in the quiet dark. No explanations, no answers, just that locked door and the echo of steps above my head. I've never felt comfortable in complete darkness, and the basement of our neighborhood library is the closest I've come to absolute blackness. Everything about that place makes me uneasy. The floor is rough and cold, the walls are thick, and most of the lights are old and weak. It doesn't help that the building itself has been around for more than 80 years. The first time I went down there, I told myself it was just a storage area for books and boxes. Now I'm not so sure. I'm a volunteer at this small library on the edge of our neighborhood. It's a modest 2-story building with a basement that stretches underneath. The walls upstairs are covered with old, peeling paint. There's a smell of ink and paper near the circulation desk. People come and go, checking out novels or reference materials. The librarians and staff members are friendly enough. They welcome anyone who wants to help. I signed up to assist because I grew up around here and thought it would be a good way to give back. They assigned me to the basement storage on my first week. I remember walking down those creaky steps and feeling an immediate drop in temperature. My arms broke out in goosebumps. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting long, shaky shadows on the cement floor. The shelves down there are tall and made of metal, lined with dusty books, old magazines, and random boxes filled with who knows what. Some corners are so dim that I can barely see a few feet ahead. I spent my first day sorting through stacks of hardcover volumes that no one had touched in years. My only company was the hum of the aging light fixture and the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance. The smell of mildew was heavy. When I took a break and went back upstairs, the brightness in the lobby almost blinded me. My eyes took a moment to adjust. Everything seemed normal up there. People chatting quietly, someone laughing at a joke, the hiss of the coffee maker in the break area. It felt comforting to be around light and sound again. The next day, I returned to the basement. My supervisor wanted me to catalog older books that weren't listed in our current database. I used a small laptop perched on a folding table near the stairs. Each time I found a title, I typed in the ISBN or the best approximation. Some of the books were so old their covers were practically flaking off. Others had that thick, dusty smell that made me sneeze. I was halfway through a pile when I heard it. A soft voice, very low, saying my name. "Hey, Brian." It sounded like a whisper, but close to my left ear. My heart rate sped up. I looked around quickly, expecting one of my coworkers, but the basement was empty. The shelves were still, except for a slight shiver that went through them whenever someone walked around upstairs. I listened for footsteps or the sound of someone moving boxes. Nothing. Silence. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was tired, or maybe there was a weird echo from upstairs. I tried to shrug it off and went back to typing. About 5 minutes later, I felt a chill on the back of my neck. It wasn't a draft because I wasn't near any vents or windows. It felt like a sudden wave of cold that settled on my shoulders. Then I heard it again. Brian. The voice was breathy, like someone trying to speak without enough air in their lungs. I snapped my head around. I muttered, "Who's there?" My voice was shaking. No answer. I stood up and checked the narrow aisles between the shelves. The overhead light flickered once, but I didn't see anyone. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was breathing in short bursts. I took a moment to calm down and decided to go upstairs. Maybe someone had called me from the top of the stairs and the sound just carried oddly. When I got to the lobby, I saw 2 co-workers leaning on the front desk. I asked if either had come down to the basement to look for me. They shook their heads. One said, "We've been here the whole time. Haven't called you." I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried to laugh it off and said something about hearing strange noises in the basement. They shrugged and said the place was old. Pipes made all sorts of sounds. The rest of that day was uneventful. I forced myself not to think about the voice. I stayed close to the staircase, half expecting to hear it again. When my shift ended, I left in a hurry and went home. I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept replaying that whisper in my head. It sounded so close, like someone standing right beside me. The next morning, I volunteered again, and of course they wanted me in the basement. I put on a brave face and tried to focus on the work. The basement door creaked when I opened it, and the musty smell hit me right away. I flipped the light switch, hoping the fluorescent would stay on without flickering. It lit up, dull and pale, but at least it didn't blink. I made my way down, coffee in one hand, a new box of labels in the other. For the first hour, nothing happened. I moved around old boxes, checked off book titles, wiped dust off covers, and kept an eye on the overhead light. The tension in my shoulders started to ease. I was thinking maybe the voice was just a one-time fluke. But then I heard metal creaking. The shelves sometimes shift when someone walks on the floor above, but I didn't see or hear anyone upstairs. I paused and listened. The basement was quiet except for that slight groan of metal. I could hear my own heartbeat. I clenched my jaw. The hair on my arms rose. Then I heard the voice again, whispering my name. This time it sounded more urgent. "Brian. Brian." My coffee cup trembled in my hand, and I spilled a bit on my shoe. I put the cup down and wiped my shoe against the floor. My throat went dry. I said, "All right, this isn't funny. Who's there?" My voice echoed in the near-empty basement. I felt a rush of panic. My mind went wild, thinking about the building's history, the old walls, the possibility of someone hiding between the shelves. But there was no shadow or movement to give me any clues. I decided to walk up and down every aisle with my phone flashlight on, just to be sure I wasn't missing anything. The beam of light revealed dusty book spines, some cobwebs near the top shelves, and old cardboard boxes stacked in corners. I didn't see any sign of a person. My ears strained for any sound of breathing or footsteps, but there was nothing but the shuffle of my own shoes. When I finally returned to my workstation, I felt exhausted, even though barely 2 hours had passed. My head was pounding. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to look scared. I also knew I had to finish cataloging these books, or I'd fall behind. That pressure kept me going. I sat back down and tried to refocus. A few minutes later, I heard the shelves creak again. I tensed up, waiting for the voice. This time it sounded weaker. "Brian, come. Here." My chest tightened. I tried to stand, but my knees felt shaky. I forced myself to move. I walked slowly in the direction I thought the sound had come from. It seemed to come from the far corner of the basement, near the older periodicals. That corner has a single overhead light that buzzes loudly. It creates a faint circle of brightness on the floor, but most of the surrounding area is dim. I stepped into that corner. The smell of moldy paper was stronger there. My eyes watered. I looked around at the metal racks, the dusty shelves, some old filing cabinets, and a few broken chairs stacked against the wall. The voice didn't speak again. I waited, feeling my heart pound. My palms were sweaty. I finally let out a breath I'd been holding and headed back to my table. I told myself it might be just my mind playing tricks. Maybe I was stressed, or the flickering lights and stale air were causing me to imagine things. I reminded myself that I hadn't seen anything real, just heard that whisper. But it felt so specific, so personal. Whoever or whatever was calling my name seemed to know exactly where I was and how to unsettle me. I kept hearing soft noises throughout the rest of the afternoon. Sometimes it sounded like a distant whisper I couldn't make out. Other times it was the creak of the shelves or a faint tapping on the cement floor. When my shift was done, I shut off the basement light and practically ran up the stairs, 2 steps at a time. In the lobby, I saw the librarian, Deborah, and another volunteer leaning on the desk. They asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale. I told them I was fine, just a little claustrophobic down there. I tried to shake it off and headed out. My heart was still racing when I got home. Over the next few weeks, I tried different things to feel safer. I brought a small flashlight with extra batteries. I wore earphones sometimes, listening to music or podcasts, hoping to drown out any strange sounds. I also tried to leave the basement door open for more light, but that just brought echoes from upstairs that confused me. Every once in a while, I would hear the voice again. It was always the same breathy tone, calling my name or mumbling something I couldn't understand. I started asking my coworkers if they had experienced anything odd. Most just gave me puzzled looks. One said the basement was creepy, and that she sometimes felt someone watching her, but she had never heard a voice. Another coworker told me the building was old. The pipes and metal racks made random noises, and that if I stayed in the basement too long, my imagination would go wild. I nodded along, but inside I felt a growing sense of dread. One afternoon, I decided to record audio on my phone while I worked. I set it to record continuously, hoping to catch the voice if it came. I spent 2 hours that day moving boxes and cataloging. I heard the voice call me twice in that familiar low whisper. When I played back the recording later, I heard myself moving around, the shuffle of books, my occasional cough, and some distant clanks from above. But I couldn't hear the voice on the playback. There was no trace of it. That discovery made me even more uneasy. I tried telling myself it could be my own mind or some weird acoustic effect, but I knew how real it sounded in the moment. Each time I heard it, my heart thumped harder, and my skin felt cold. My muscles tensed up. I couldn't breathe properly, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me. A few days ago, I was in the basement again, boxing up old newspapers. The shelves started their usual groaning. Then I heard a series of soft taps on the concrete, almost like footsteps. I turned my phone flashlight on and aimed it at the far aisle. My breath caught in my throat. I swear I saw a shape move behind a shelf. It was a quick blur, something dark. But when I rushed over, there was nothing there. The voice didn't speak that time, but the air felt thick, like a humid day in a closed room. I stood there, feeling sweat run down my temples. I kept turning in slow circles, trying to see if anything moved again. Everything was still. After that incident, I decided I had reached my limit. I gathered my things and made a beeline for the stairs. Once I was up in the lobby, I steadied my breathing before telling my coworkers I had finished for the day. They must have seen the look on my face because no one asked me to do anything else. Now, every time someone mentions the basement, I feel a knot forming in my gut. If they need me to run down for a quick box or to look for an old volume, I pretend to check my phone or find some excuse to stay upstairs. I don't want to admit that the place frightens me, but it's obvious I don't like going down there alone. I've heard that voice too many times. I don't understand it, and I'm not sure I want to. I still volunteer at the library, but I stick to the main floors and help with shelving or assisting at the front desk. Sometimes I see new volunteers head down the basement steps, bright-eyed and unaware. Part of me wants to warn them, but I stay quiet. I figure if they hear something, they'll come up spooked and tell the others, just like I did. Maybe some part of me doesn't want to scare them unnecessarily. It's possible they'll never experience what I did. Even so, I remember every detail of those moments. The voice right at my ear, the cold feeling on my neck, the tapping on the floor, and the shadow I glimpsed for a second. All of it felt personal, like something wanted my attention. I have no answers, and the library staff don't seem to believe me, or at least they don't show it. They chalk it up to nerves or the building's quirks. I keep busy upstairs these days. I greet people at the entrance, I help organize returns, I work on the computers when they need updates. Every so often, though, someone will ask, "Can you go fetch those old magazines from the basement?" My stomach tightens. I grip the edge of the counter. Then I say, "Sure, I'll go in a minute." But I always stall. If I can talk a coworker into going with me, I do. Usually nobody wants to go, so they tell me it can wait until tomorrow. I take a deep breath of relief, but I never let it show on my face. I remember how confident I felt when I first started volunteering. I had a little pride in helping my old neighborhood library. Now I feel a different sense of responsibility. Keep my distance from that basement unless absolutely necessary. The building may be old, but something in that basement feels older than the bricks and pipes. I can't prove it. I have no recorded evidence, no eyewitness accounts besides my own. But I trust my gut, and my gut says something is off down there. Most days I manage to avoid it. But there are times, late in the afternoon, when we're short-handed, and I have no choice. I grip the railing, descend the steps, keep my eyes forward, and try not to think about the corners and shadows. I do whatever task needs doing, and then I hurry back up. So far, I've heard nothing else. But I can't forget that voice. It's always in the back of my mind, like a memory that won't fade. I can't explain any of it. I can only say what I saw, heard, and felt. And I can say this for sure: I think twice before going down to that basement alone, every single time. I still remember that night because it made my heart pound in a way I hadn't felt before. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The building was completely silent. The overhead lights in the lobby were dimmed, and the only other source of light was the small lamp at my desk. I was tired and a little bored because the night shifts can feel endless sometimes. I was hoping for an uneventful few hours until sunrise. I work as a security guard for a commercial building downtown. The building has 8 floors. There's a large lobby with a marble floor, and there's a set of elevators in the center. During the day, people fill the place: office workers, delivery people, and sometimes cleaning staff. By midnight, almost everyone is gone. Sometimes the cleaning crew stays until 1 a.m., but that evening they had already finished. I remember the faint smell of cleaning chemicals in the hallway, and the polished tiles that looked shiny under the overhead lamps. Usually, I monitor the security cameras at the front desk and answer calls from the few people who work late. Sometimes a manager has trouble swiping his key card, or a maintenance worker needs access to a locked office. But that particular night was quiet. Nothing was happening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents above me. My eyes were on the screens in front of me. I was scanning the empty corridors. I saw no movement. I heard nothing unusual. Everything felt normal until the intercom for the elevator started to ring. It wasn't the normal ringtone from the phone on my desk. It was the faint buzz from the elevator's built-in intercom system. There's a small panel on the front desk that lights up whenever someone presses the emergency button or the intercom button inside the elevator. That night, that panel lit up with a soft green glow. I stared at it for a second. My first thought was that maybe someone got stuck or needed help. It happens sometimes if the system glitches. I picked up the receiver next to the panel. Before I could say anything, I heard someone whispering. It was a quiet, shaky voice. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The voice said, "Help me. I'm stuck." The words were short and cut off. There was static in the background. My shoulders tensed up. I felt a slight chill on my arms because something about the voice sounded off. It wasn't loud or frantic. It was a slow, raspy whisper. I asked, "Hello, are you okay? Which elevator are you in?" The only response I got was more static and a faint breath on the other end. I leaned closer to the receiver and tried again. No real answer. Just a hiss and a soft, strained sound that might have been a word or two, but I couldn't make it out. My heart started beating faster. I wanted to see if there was an actual elevator in motion. I checked the console in front of me. The system that shows which elevator is in use indicated that all elevators were idle. No doors were open. No one was inside. The screen showed zero activity. I put down the receiver, stood up, and checked the security cameras in the elevator shafts. We have live feeds that show the interior of each car. All of them were empty. I could see them sitting at their respective floors, doors closed, lights off inside. I glanced at the main elevator in the lobby. Its doors were shut and I heard no sounds. I tried to remain calm. I figured maybe the system was malfunctioning. Still, the whisper had sounded very real. I walked across the lobby to the main elevator. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The building was so silent that I could hear my own breathing. I pressed the button to open the elevator doors. The doors slid open with a slight hiss and I saw the empty cab. No one was there. The overhead light inside was on, but it didn't flicker or anything. It looked perfectly normal. I stepped inside for a second just to see if something was wrong. I checked the intercom panel on the elevator wall. It was intact, no sign of damage. Everything looked fine. I walked back out and tried to call the elevator intercom again from my console at the desk. I pressed the button to establish a new connection. Nothing happened. There was no static, no whisper, not even a beep. The line was dead. I hung up and tried once more. Still silence. I stood there with the receiver in my hand. My throat felt dry. I swallowed hard and glanced around. The lobby looked the same as always, but I felt uneasy. I felt a pressure in my chest. My instincts told me something was off. I tried to push it aside. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of how tired I was. I went back to my seat and tried to focus on the camera feeds again. I looked at all the corridors. They were empty. I looked at the building's side entrance. Locked and still. I looked at the back hallway. Quiet. I looked at the parking garage camera. No movement. Everything seemed normal except for the buzzing feeling in my head that told me the elevator whisper was real. I tried to calm down by getting a drink of water from the small cooler near the desk. The water tasted lukewarm. I leaned against the desk and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself there must have been some glitch or cross-connection from another building or another line. But deep down, I didn't believe it was just a glitch. After a few minutes, I heard the buzz from the elevator panel again. This time it was softer. The green light blinked on the console. It felt like a slow pulse. I picked up the receiver, but I didn't say anything right away. I just listened. The whisper came through again. It said something like, "I can't get out." It sounded like the same voice, but a bit clearer. The static was there, but not as strong as before. I tried to speak, but my words came out shaky. "Hello? Where are you?" I asked. I heard only a faint exhale, like someone breathing out in frustration or fear. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm trying to help. Tell me which floor you're between." More static. Then the connection dropped. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against my hand. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I checked the elevator statuses again. All were stationary. None registered any weight inside. I knew what that meant. According to the control system, no one was in any of the elevators. I decided to do a physical check of each elevator. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the first floor elevator bank. The overhead lights in that corridor were dimmer at night. The hallway felt cold. I pushed the button for the second elevator. Its doors opened slowly. I shone my flashlight inside even though the interior light was on. Nothing was inside. I checked the emergency hatch on the ceiling. It was closed and locked. I pressed the test button for the intercom. It beeped normally. Then I went to the next elevator, did the same routine. It was empty. I repeated this for all 3 elevators in the main lobby bank. No sign of anyone. The building also has a service elevator in a separate corridor. I walked there. My shoes made a light squeak on the floor. The hallway felt cramped with storage rooms on each side. The service elevator was at the ground floor as well. Its doors were also closed. I pressed the button. Doors opened. It was empty, silent, and still. I checked the intercom. It gave me the usual beep. Everything looked fine. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to think about supernatural things. I don't usually believe in that. But I was running out of logical explanations. I looked at my watch. It was around 2:30 a.m. by then. I still had several hours left in my shift and I felt uneasy. My skin prickled as I stood in the empty service elevator. I stepped out and let the doors close. Then I turned around and went back to the front lobby. My mind was racing with questions. I returned to my desk and tried calling the building manager, but he didn't pick up. That's not unusual at that hour. I thought about calling the elevator maintenance company, but I didn't have a strong reason to request emergency service. The last time I called them for a false alarm, they arrived after an hour and charged a hefty fee. I didn't want to get in trouble if this turned out to be a weird glitch. I sat there staring at the console, waiting to see if the call would come in again. My heart was still beating quickly and I felt sweat on my palms. I tried to distract myself by checking the cameras one more time. Everything was still the same. Hallways empty, offices locked, lights off. No movement. Around 2:45 a.m. I heard a faint clunk from somewhere behind me. I turned around fast. The sound came from the direction of the elevator bank. It wasn't loud, but it stood out in the silence. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight again, and walked slowly toward the sound. My steps sounded heavy. My chest felt tight. I reached the elevator area and waited. I didn't hear anything else at first. Then the overhead lights flickered. That made me flinch. They went right back to normal, but my heart skipped a beat. I approached the main elevator and pressed the button to open the doors again. Nothing happened. I pressed it again and waited. After a few seconds, the door slid open. It was empty, same as before. The floor was spotless, no footprints or anything. I stepped in and looked at the control panel. All floors were lit in the standard way. I tapped the intercom button inside the cab, thinking maybe I could recreate the connection. I heard a faint crackle, but no whisper. After a moment, it went dead again. I stepped back out and let the doors close. My skin felt cold. The hair on my arms was standing up. I kept looking around the lobby to see if maybe someone was messing with me. But I saw no one. The cameras would have shown if someone snuck in. There was nobody there. I decided to walk the floors. Sometimes I do a patrol to make sure everything is fine. I took the stairs to the second floor. Each floor has lights set to motion sensors, so they turn on when I walk by. The second floor corridor lit up as I opened the stairwell door. It felt empty. I looked into each office window, all dark, nothing out of place. My flashlight beam shook a little because my hands were trembling. I told myself I needed to calm down. I moved on to the third floor, did the same check. No sign of anyone. Fourth floor, same thing. I kept going up. By the time I reached the fifth floor, I was sweating a bit. I wiped my forehead with my shirt sleeve. Everything was normal. I felt silly wandering around an empty building, but I wanted to make sure no one was really stuck. The voice had been clear enough that I couldn't ignore it. When I got to the sixth floor, I thought I heard a faint scraping sound from around the corner. I stopped moving for a moment and just listened. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I held my flashlight against my side. I waited, but I heard nothing else. I walked over to the elevator doors on the sixth floor and pressed my ear against them. I didn't hear any mechanical whirring or voices, just silence. The metal felt cold. I felt a slight tremor in my stomach, like I was about to be sick. I took a step back, looked around the corridor, and saw nothing unusual. I finished checking the 7th and 8th floors. Still nothing. I took the elevator back down to the lobby just to see if that might trigger anything. The ride felt ordinary, but I couldn't relax. I kept glancing at the intercom button. It stayed dark. When I reached the lobby, the doors opened with the usual ding. I stepped out and felt that cold draft again. Back at the front desk, everything looked the same. The clock on my monitor read 3:15 a.m. I sat down trying to collect my thoughts. I stared at the panel for the elevator intercom. It was dark. No calls. No blinking light. I felt an ache in my shoulders from the tension. My pulse was still racing. I told myself to focus on the rest of the shift and ignore the weird feeling in my chest. Time passed slowly. Every little noise in the building made me jump. The air conditioner kicked on a few times, and each time the vents rattled, I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I tried reading a few pages of a manual on my desk, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept shifting to the elevator panel. I kept expecting it to light up again. Around 4 a.m., I almost dozed off. My eyes were heavy. I must have blinked longer than usual because I jerked awake at the sound of faint static. I grabbed the receiver immediately, but it was dead. The light on the panel wasn't on, so I figured I imagined it. I rubbed my face, feeling the stubble on my chin. My head hurt and my throat was dry again. I got up and did another quick walk around the lobby. Everything looked normal. The front glass doors were locked. I could see the streetlights outside through the glass. No cars were passing by. It was too late for that. I stood there for a minute, gazing at the empty street. Then I turned around and looked at the dark corners of the lobby. Nothing moved. By 5 a.m., I was worn out. My shift would end in an hour. I didn't receive any other calls on the intercom. I sat there trying to process what happened. I kept replaying the whisper in my head. Help me. I'm stuck. I couldn't shake the idea that someone or something had called me for help. I knew the building was empty, but I couldn't deny what I heard. My body still felt tense. My stomach felt twisted and my hands were clammy. When the first employee arrived around 6 a.m., I felt a rush of relief. The day shift was starting soon, and I could report my strange night to someone else. One of the regular office workers walked in, gave a quick nod, and headed to the elevator. I watched him press the button. The doors opened normally. He stepped inside without hesitation. The elevator whisked him away to whatever floor he needed. I didn't hear any strange noises. I didn't hear any static. Soon, other people trickled in. The building felt alive again. The phone started ringing with routine questions. The presence of people made me feel less stressed. Still, I had the memory of that whisper stuck in my mind. It didn't fade. When my relief showed up, I told him we might have an issue with the elevator intercom. He said he would check it out and call maintenance if needed. I didn't mention the voice in detail because I didn't want to sound ridiculous. I just said the intercom might be malfunctioning, and I left it at that. I grabbed my things, nodded goodbye, and walked out the front door. The sky was lighter. I saw a few cars on the street. My shift was over. Even with the sun coming up, I still felt unsettled. My body was tired, but my mind was racing. I just wanted to go home and lie down. I couldn't stop thinking about that whisper. It was so clear. It didn't sound like a radio glitch. It sounded like a real person. But there was no one there. I got home, took off my uniform, and tried to relax. But as I sat on my couch, I kept hearing that whisper in my head. I couldn't understand why it happened or who was on the other end of that line. Maybe it was a leftover message from a previous call. Maybe it was an electrical fault in the system. Or maybe someone found a way to tamper with the elevator intercom from another location. I couldn't be sure. All I knew was that I felt a strong sense that something tried to reach me. The rest of that day, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Even when I finally fell asleep, I had trouble resting. I would roll over and think about the empty elevator, the hiss of static, and that low, raspy voice asking for help. It's been a while, but I still remember the way it made me feel. exposed, unsure, and alone in that big building. Even if I never hear that whisper again, the memory stays with me. And every time I take the elevator on a late shift, I check the intercom, half expecting to hear that voice again, asking for help from somewhere that I can't see. I had the same nightmare 3 nights in a row. I saw a street lamp tipping over in front of my building. It screeched as it bent, and it slammed onto the pavement with a loud thud. Every time I woke up gasping, my heart pounding hard enough to hurt. At first, I told myself it was just stress. Then, on Monday morning, I heard real metal bending and clanging on the asphalt outside my window. When I looked down, the same lamppost from my dream had snapped. It was cracked at the base, lying sideways on the sidewalk. One man stood nearby with his hands on his head, staring at the broken light. No one was hurt, but it felt too close to what I had seen in my dreams. I study statistics at a university in the city, and I've never believed in anything supernatural. I like numbers and patterns. I love how probabilities can explain a lot of coincidences. But this lamppost business messed with me. It didn't kill anyone, so I brushed it aside as an odd event. I told myself it was a fluke. Still, I felt uneasy. 3 nights of the same dream, followed by the exact thing in real life on the same week, left me rattled. I tried to move on by burying my head in assignments, but I kept seeing that post in my mind. 4 days later, I had another weird dream. This time, I was walking by a parking lot near the main avenue. I saw a parked motorcycle skid into the road. In my dream, I looked over and saw a bus swerving to avoid it. The bus didn't crash into anything, it just slammed the brakes. I woke up with my fists clenched, my neck stiff from tension. I pushed that dream aside, got ready for class, and forced myself to think about normal stuff like what to wear and what to eat for breakfast. That morning I was running late. I walked outside and saw a small crowd gathered by the parking lot. I could hear people talking in tense voices. As I got closer, a man pointed at a motorcycle that had tipped over and slid across the ground. I recognized the details from my dream. Same red bike, same approximate position. I didn't see a bus, but I heard someone mention that a bus had jammed its brakes a few minutes before. Nobody was injured, but everyone looked startled. My throat went dry. I turned and walked away fast, because I felt a burning sensation behind my eyes. I was so freaked out that my hands shook. I tried to calm down with numbers. I thought about probability, telling myself that coincidences happen. But I felt this heavy pressure on my chest, as if something was caving in on me. I rushed to the campus library, hoping to distract myself, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept picturing that motorcycle on its side, the exact angle I had seen in my head the night before. People walked past me in the library, chatting about ordinary things. Meanwhile, I was sweating for no reason in an air-conditioned room. A week passed, and I managed to sleep without any disturbing dreams. I started to think maybe it was over. Then, 2 nights later, I dreamt I was standing near a grocery store in my neighborhood. I heard a loud popping noise followed by shouts. I saw sparks flying. The dream was a blur, but I remembered the store sign flickering. I woke up breathing fast, my t-shirt soaked in sweat. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to block that image from my mind. The next afternoon, I went to that same grocery store for some snacks. I was on edge, scanning the place for any sign of trouble. The lights were fine, and the sign outside looked normal. I grabbed a soda and some chips. I was at the checkout line when I heard a loud popping noise overhead. My stomach lurched. The lights flickered. The store manager yelled something like, "We have a short. Everyone move away from the display." Sparks flew from a faulty wire near the ceiling. A small portion of the overhead light fixture fell, landing on a rack of candy bars. It was minor damage, and employees managed to shut off the power in that section. The manager looked frazzled, but no one was hurt. I stood still, my hands clenched around my snack bag. My ears rang. I felt unsteady on my feet. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and sat at my kitchen table. I stared at the wall for a while, just listening to my own heartbeat. My mind went in circles. I was used to analyzing data, not random events that matched my nightmares. I felt like my life had spun into some bizarre territory I couldn't measure or predict. I kept telling myself maybe it was all in my head, but it kept happening. I thought about telling a friend, but I pictured them laughing or staring at me like I was losing it. Over the next few days, I slept poorly. My dreams were just random shapes and blurred sounds. But every time I drifted off, I was scared I'd see another accident. My neck felt stiff most of the time. My appetite was off. I avoided looking out my window, and I walked around the neighborhood trying not to notice anything suspicious. I felt like I was waiting for some new disaster to pop out of nowhere. Then, late one night, I dozed off at my desk. I dreamt about a crowded street I recognized, 2 blocks from campus. In the dream, I heard shouts and metal scraping. I looked around and saw scaffolding breaking off from a building under construction. Pieces of metal fell onto the sidewalk. No one died in the dream, but I heard people scream and run. I woke up with a jolt, my skin clammy. My phone showed 3 a.m. My heart was banging in my chest. I shut my eyes, trying to push away the images. The following morning, I felt jumpy. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call for help if anything weird happened. I had to pass that same construction site on my way to class. When I got there, I noticed red tape around the sidewalk. A worker was directing pedestrians away. He said, "Watch out. We had a loose section on the scaffolding. We're fixing it now." I looked up and saw a bent metal bar dangling from the top floor. The worker told me they had to close off part of the sidewalk for safety. Nothing had crashed to the ground yet, but it was close. My stomach tensed. I walked away as fast as I could, not looking back. I felt like I was living in a state of constant dread. Every time I closed my eyes at night, I worried I'd see the next problem. During the day, I jumped at the sound of cars honking or metal clanging. I flinched whenever I heard sudden noises. My hands felt sweaty even in cool weather. I tried to hold a coffee cup in class, but it kept slipping in my grip because my palms were damp. Some classmates looked at me like I was sick or hungover. I didn't know how to explain that I was terrified of my own dreams. One afternoon, I decided to talk to a professor I trust. He teaches probability theory and is always open to discussions about strange coincidences. I went to his office, closed the door, and told him I'd been having these weird dreams that came true. I tried to describe them in a calm, direct way, focusing on the dates and outcomes. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "You might be noticing patterns that confirm your expectations. Our minds can trick us." I understood what he meant. He suggested I record all my dreams, both the ones that come true and the ones that don't. He wanted me to gather data. I tried that for a few days, writing down every detail from my sleep. Some dreams were random nonsense, like me forgetting to study for an exam or missing a bus. But the real problem was the next big one I had. It was vivid. I dreamt I was walking past a certain intersection near my apartment. There was a loud crash and the sound of grinding metal. I saw a car spinning around and smashing into a lamppost. People nearby backed away. I heard an alarm blaring from another car that got sideswiped. I woke up shaking, my face hot. The dream's detail bugged me because I recognized the intersection. It's right near a pharmacy I often visit. I wrote everything in my notebook. The next day, I avoided that area. I walked 3 blocks out of my way to bypass it. I spent the day in a near panic, expecting to hear a crash at any moment. By evening, nothing had happened, and I started thinking maybe this was the one that wouldn't come true. That idea calmed me a little. I decided to head home. The moment I turned onto my street, I heard a screech of brakes behind me. I spun around and saw 2 cars colliding in the intersection. They weren't going at high speed. It looked like one car had run a stop sign. The front bumper of the second car slammed against the side of the first. The first car lurched, then rolled into a lamppost. The lamppost wobbled, but it didn't collapse. I heard a continuous horn blaring from one of the vehicles. Glass littered the asphalt. People gathered. I stood there, breathing fast, my nails digging into my palms. The drivers got out and started shouting at each other. Some bystanders called for help. No one was seriously hurt. but one guy was gripping his arm and wincing. My entire body felt cold. It was exactly the type of crash I'd seen in my dream. Same intersection, same type of car bumper damage. I hurried home. My vision felt blurry, and my heart hammered. I tossed my bag on the floor and just stood there in my living room. I couldn't stay still, my legs were restless. I paced around, checking my phone, flipping through TV channels, opening and closing the fridge. I kept replaying the crash in my head. I felt like I was in a loop of anxiety. I took a cold shower, hoping that would shock me out of my panic. The water made me shiver, but it didn't clear my head. Now, each time I go to bed, I dread the next dream. I stay awake until my eyes burn. I sit at my desk, flipping through stats textbooks, trying to bury my mind in formulas. But I can't ignore the possibility that I might see another accident or another disaster. My body reacts to every small noise outside. I hear a muffled bang from the street or a car door slamming and I freeze. I keep expecting another dream to become reality. I'm still trying to gather data like my professor advised, but it's hard to stay objective when my hands shake while I write in my notebook. I can't help noticing that each event lines up with dates from my dreams. Even if it's off by a day or two, it's close enough to make my skin crawl. I'm scared to tell anyone else because I don't want to sound unstable. I manage to function, go to class, buy groceries, and pay bills. But inside, I'm on high alert. I haven't found a pattern or formula to stop these predictions. I just live with this sense that I might see something else tonight, and that it might happen the next day. I don't know if there's a way out of this cycle. I keep hoping that if I ignore it, maybe the nightmares will stop and life will settle back to normal. But every night I fight sleep. My muscles are tense, my jaw aches, and my pulse speeds up whenever I remember the exact details of those dreams. For now, I just keep my eyes open. I try to handle my day-to-day tasks, but my mind is always ready to jump at the next sign of trouble. I walk around with a tight feeling in my chest, wondering if tomorrow will bring another broken street lamp, another short circuit, or another crash. That's my life now. A constant wait for the next bad dream to turn real. I don't know how to make it stop. All I can do is try not to let my fear take over completely. So far, that's the best I can manage. I still get nervous when I remember the night I realized that the room next to mine wasn't as empty as everyone claimed. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted a decent place to stay while I handled a few work meetings. But that visit changed everything I thought I knew about that small, cozy hotel. It's not a fancy place, and I usually don't expect much from it. I just need a bed, a shower, and a decent Wi-Fi connection to get by. I didn't plan on finding something strange behind that locked door, yet somehow I got pulled into it the moment I checked in. I've been coming to this town for about 2 years. It's a quiet, rural area with old buildings and friendly locals. The hotel stands on a narrow street with worn pavement and a small sign above the entrance. At first glance, it looks unremarkable. The front desk is a basic wooden counter, and there's a hallway on the right that leads to the stairwell and the rooms. The whole place feels a bit outdated, but the staff is nice. They remember me by name now. The interior smells faintly of cleaning products mixed with an old, musty scent. I don't mind. I'm used to it. When I arrived this last time, I noticed something odd. Room 204, the one right next to my usual 205, was locked up. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but that day the door looked more worn out, with a faded sign that read, "Under Maintenance." I asked the young woman at the front desk about it while I signed the check-in form. She shrugged and said they weren't renting it because of plumbing problems. I didn't think much of it. Maintenance issues happen in older places. I nodded, took my key, and went upstairs. The hallway has dull carpeting with a repeating pattern of swirls. My room 205 is at the end of the corridor. Right next to it is 204. I passed by that closed door and felt a slight draft around my ankles. It was probably just the air current from the old windows at the end of the hallway. My room looked the same as always. One bed, a simple dresser, a small TV, and a tiny bathroom. I threw my suitcase on the floor and changed my clothes. I had a quick meeting scheduled, so I didn't stick around. I locked my door and went out. That day was busy. I had to drive to a neighboring town to visit a warehouse. On the way back, I stopped for a late dinner with a local contact. By the time I returned to the hotel, it was near midnight. The lobby was empty except for the night clerk, an older man who always seems half asleep. He didn't say much, just mumbled a greeting as I headed upstairs. The corridor lights were dim. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but the floor creaked occasionally. I fumbled with my key and let myself into my room. I was exhausted. I wanted a shower and a solid night's sleep. I had just finished brushing my teeth when I heard this faint noise through the wall. It was soft, like a voice. I turned off the tap and listened. Nothing. Then, as I dried my face with a towel, I heard it again. It sounded like someone speaking, maybe in a low, hushed tone. I couldn't make out the words. I pressed my ear against the wall that separated my room from 204. It was quiet for a second. Then I heard what seemed like muffled sobs or maybe a woman whispering. My pulse quickened. I wondered if the staff had made a mistake and actually rented the room. But why would the front desk say it was off limits? I tried to ignore it and crawled into bed. The sheets smelled clean enough, though everything felt slightly damp, probably due to the old ventilation. I turned off the lights and tried to relax. But every few minutes I heard those hushed voices again. Sometimes it sounded like crying, other times like two people arguing. I couldn't catch any clear words. Around 1 a.m., it got louder. I sat up in bed. My heart rate sped up. I felt a chill along my arms. I decided to see if there was someone in the hallway, maybe messing around. I opened my door and looked out. The corridor was dark, lit only by a single overhead light. The door to 204 remained shut, with that old sign still hanging there. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. I felt dumb just standing in my pajamas, so I went back inside and closed my door. Immediately, the noise started up again, this time more urgent, like frantic whispers. I could hear it right through the wall near the headboard of my bed. I pressed my palm against the wallpaper. It felt cold. The whispers continued, and I could feel my chest getting tight. I was breathing harder. My scalp tingled with anxiety. I turned on the lamp, put on some pants, and decided to confront the night clerk about it. I grabbed my key, walked down the hall, and found the clerk reading a paperback behind the front desk. He seemed bored. I asked him if someone had checked into 204. He glanced at me with tired eyes and shook his head. He said nobody was staying there, and it had been locked for months. I told him about the voices. He looked at me like I was imagining things. He said the room was empty and had a serious plumbing issue. He insisted nobody was inside. He even offered to let me move to another room if I was uncomfortable. But I'd already unpacked, and I didn't feel like switching in the middle of the night. I told him I'd manage. Back in my room, I sat on the bed. My stomach felt queasy. It was that uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't add up. I turned off the lamp, hoping maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. But the second the room went dark, I heard it again. Quiet murmurs, like someone pleading. My pulse thundered in my ears. My temples throbbed. I crawled under the covers and tried to block it out. I put a pillow over my head. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours. At some point, I guess I passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I woke up feeling stiff. The memory of those whispers came flooding back. My mouth was dry. I got up, splashed water on my face, and got dressed. I had a long day ahead, but I couldn't shake the tension in my body. On my way out, I decided to take another look at the door to 204. I bent down, noticing a narrow gap where the door met the frame. I leaned in, resting my hand against the doorknob. My heart was pounding. Through that thin crack, I saw something inside. It looked like an old bed, covered in dusty sheets. The air smelled stale, like a closed-up attic. Then I caught a glimpse of a dark figure. It moved behind the bed, almost gliding. My breath caught in my throat. I felt my stomach twist. I jerked back, blinked, and looked again. Nothing. No movement at all. I rushed downstairs, trying to act normal. I left the hotel without talking to anyone. During the day, I tried to focus on my appointments, but my mind kept drifting back to that locked room. I replayed those sounds in my head. I questioned if it was just old pipes groaning, or maybe the wind. But the sobbing had been too clear. The presence of that shape behind the bed was too real. By the afternoon, I couldn't concentrate on my work. My legs felt restless, and my hands shook a little when I tried to make notes. That evening, I returned around 7 p.m. I decided to grab a snack from a nearby diner before heading upstairs. The lobby was busier than usual, with a couple of guests checking in. The same young receptionist from the day before was at the desk. She looked at me with a polite smile and asked how my stay was going. I hesitated, then said everything was fine. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I also wasn't sure if I'd be brushed off again. When I got to my floor, I stopped at the door to 204. I put my ear against it, ignoring how ridiculous I probably looked. I heard nothing. The silence felt heavier than normal. I slid my hand over the doorknob. It felt cold, and it didn't budge. I walked into my own room, dropped my briefcase on the chair, and kicked off my shoes. I stood there listening. Everything seemed quiet, at least for a little while. I turned on the TV for background noise and spent some time checking my emails. Around 10 p.m., the hallway lights went dim, and the noises began again. This time it was a soft thumping, like someone knocking from inside 204. It wasn't loud. It sounded irregular, like a hand tapping lightly on a wall. My throat felt tight. I stepped into the hallway. It was empty. The sign on 204 still said, "Under maintenance." I glanced around and saw no one else. My palms were sweaty. I felt a tremor in my right leg as I walked over to the night clerk's station. He was there again, reading a magazine this time. I told him I could hear tapping noises and voices coming from 204. He stared at me with the same tired expression, then flipped a page in his magazine. He said, "I promise you, that room is empty. We don't rent it out." His voice sounded firm, almost annoyed. I asked if we could open it and take a quick look. He shook his head and said the door was kept locked for safety reasons. He repeated something about leaks and old pipes. I tried to argue, but he wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I headed back upstairs, not sure what else to do. Once I was inside my room, I turned off the TV and sat quietly, waiting. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. After a few minutes, the same muffled voices started again. They rose and fell like someone was pleading, then whining, then quiet again. It reminded me of a person begging for something, but I still couldn't catch any words. My chest felt tight. My eyes started to water, not from sadness, but from sheer stress. I got up and went to the wall. I knocked softly. There was a moment of silence, and then I heard frantic whispers. It was as if someone realized I was there. My face felt hot, my muscles tensed. I whispered, "Hello?" I didn't expect an answer, but I had to do something. In response, I heard a distinct, drawn-out sob. That was enough to make my hair stand on end. I backed away from the wall, almost tripping over the corner of the bed. My mind was racing. I felt a jolt of fear shoot through my chest. My mouth went dry again, and I had to swallow hard. I grabbed my phone. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I heard sobbing in an unoccupied room? The staff already insisted it was empty. I couldn't prove anything without actually getting inside. I paced around my room for a few minutes, then decided to try one more time to see something through that gap in the door. The hallway was silent. I crouched by the door to 204 and leaned in, pressing my face close. I noticed a damp, musty smell. My neck felt tight, and I struggled to stay calm. Through the tiny space, I could see the old bed. The sheets looked stained in patches. The mattress sagged in the middle. There was a faint shadow near the headboard, shifting back and forth. It was like a flickering shape, as if someone was kneeling on the other side. My heart slammed against my ribs. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. I could hear a soft scrape, like fingernails on wood. Then, all at once, the shape seemed to move toward me. I scrambled back, nearly falling on my tailbone. I stood up fast, my knees shaking. I hurried into my room and locked the door. My chest felt tight, and I was panting, almost hyperventilating. I flipped on every light. I didn't know what to do or who to tell. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone. My thoughts spiraled with questions, but I tried to calm down. After a few minutes, I got under the covers. I left the lamp on and tried to sleep with the blankets pulled up to my chin. The voices and tapping continued for a while, then faded around 2 a.m. I dozed off eventually, though I kept jolting awake at every small noise. In the morning, I packed my things quickly. I wanted out. Downstairs, the receptionist asked if I was checking out early. I told her I had a change of plans. She nodded and didn't press. I could barely look her in the eye. Part of me wanted to confront her again about the room, but I was too rattled. I just wanted to leave. After paying, I lugged my suitcase to my car. I shut the door, inhaled a deep breath, and started the engine. My hands were shaky on the steering wheel. As I pulled away, I glanced at the second-floor windows. One of them was 204. I thought I saw a silhouette move behind the curtain. It might have been my imagination, but I felt my stomach clench. I still think about what happened in that room. Every time I recall those sobs and whispers, my chest tightens. I don't know if there was someone trapped in there or something else altogether. Nobody confessed anything, and I never got proof of what I heard or saw. But I'm certain there was a presence in that room. The staff kept saying it was empty, but it never felt empty. It felt lived in, haunted by someone who couldn't leave. I haven't been back to that hotel since. I'm not sure I ever will. Even now, the memory of those frantic whispers still makes my skin crawl. When I try to explain it to people, they look at me with skepticism. But I know what I heard. I know something was behind that locked door. And I'm not sure I want to find out the whole truth. I'm the superintendent of a 6-story residential building. People here usually complain about small stuff: elevator noise, packages not being delivered on time, paint chipping on the walls. But recently, more than a few residents have approached me with the same concern. The 4th-floor corridor is always freezing cold, even on warm days. At first, I shrugged it off and thought maybe the AC vents there were stronger, or there was some draft from a poorly sealed window. But when 3 different residents came to me on the same week, saying that they felt chills in that hallway, I decided to check it out myself. I remember stepping off the elevator on the 4th floor with a light jacket on, just because it was a bit breezy outside. The second I walked onto that corridor, I noticed the air felt different. It was thick, and it felt colder than the rest of the building. I looked around at the doors, the gray carpeting, the soft yellowish lighting. Nothing seemed unusual, but I felt this sinking in my stomach. My skin prickled and I was wide awake, like I had just downed a cup of strong coffee. I didn't see anything out of place. There was no open window, no visible vent blowing cold air. Everything looked normal. I paced up and down that hallway, hoping to find some physical explanation. Maybe the windows weren't insulated well. I checked each window. They were closed and locked. I ran my hand over the edges of the frames. Nothing. No wind passing through. I touched the walls to see if there was a temperature difference. The walls felt cold, but I wasn't sure if that was my imagination or the hallway's real condition. I decided to come back the next day with a thermometer to confirm it. The next day, late afternoon, I took a basic digital thermometer from the building's small maintenance storage. I went to the 1st floor first and measured the hallway temperature, around 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I felt comfortable. I headed to the 2nd floor, same range. 3rd floor, no change. Then I got to the 4th floor and stood there, waiting for the thermometer to settle. It dropped to 62 degrees. That was already surprising, but then it kept going down until it settled at 60. That was a solid 10 degrees colder than the other floors. There was no reason for that. The building's HVAC system is shared across all floors, so everything should be consistent. Yet it was definitely colder. I told a few residents I was investigating. Most of them just nodded and seemed relieved I was taking it seriously. One older resident, Mr. Ramirez, called me over to his door that afternoon. He's lived in the building for decades. He invited me into his unit. I stepped inside. His place smelled like books and old leather. He had stacks of newspapers on a low wooden shelf. He offered me a seat, then told me he remembered a big fire happening on that floor a long time ago. He said the corridor walls had to be reconstructed. He claimed someone got trapped in the smoke and never came out the same. I listened carefully, but I tried not to get wrapped up in stories that might be based on rumors. However, Mr. Ramirez was pretty serious about it. He said that since that time, people have always talked about some lingering cold on the fourth floor. He also said that late at night, some residents have heard cracking noises in the walls, as if there was still something burning inside. I didn't know how to respond. I just said I'd do my best to figure out if there was a structural issue or something else. But his story stuck with me. That night, I couldn't get the thought out of my head. I know old buildings can have weird drafts. Sometimes there's an old ventilation shaft or poorly sealed duct that can cause a strange airflow. But the crackling noises people mentioned sounded odd. I decided that after my usual administrative work, I'd go to the corridor again to see if I could hear anything. I got there around 10 p.m., when most folks were winding down. The hallway lights were dimmer. The building has a system that lowers the brightness late at night to save electricity. The corridor looked a bit eerie. The carpet was that dull gray, and the lights had a slight flicker to them. As soon as I stepped off the elevator, I felt the cold again. It hit me in the face like a blast of outdoor winter air, except everything was closed. I walked over to the window at the end of the corridor. It was sealed, locked. I tapped on the glass, checked the latch, listened for any wind. Nothing. I started walking slowly down the hall, passing each apartment door. I could hear my own breathing. I felt my chest tighten a bit. My fingers felt cold, like I'd been holding a piece of ice. I rubbed my hands together, but they didn't warm up much. About halfway down the corridor, I stopped because I heard a faint popping sound. It was soft, like a piece of wood expanding. Then it stopped. I stood still and listened. A few seconds later, I heard it again, a faint crackle from inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the plaster. The cold against my cheek was uncomfortable. I heard another pop, followed by a tiny clicking noise. It reminded me of the sound you hear when logs settle in a fireplace, but it was very quiet. I stepped back and took a breath. My heart was beating fast. There was nothing particularly threatening about the sound, but it was just strange to hear it in a place with no fireplace or obvious source of that noise. I decided to do a more thorough check. I went to the utility closet on that floor. It holds electrical panels and some basic wiring access. Everything appeared normal. No alarms were triggered. The panel wasn't overly warm or hot. No sign of an electrical short. I checked the walls for moisture or any sign of a leak that could cause that cracking noise. Everything was dry. The corridor stayed cold, though. It was consistent, like walking into a room with an air conditioner on full blast. I stayed there for about 30 minutes. Just pacing and listening. Every few minutes, I'd catch another faint pop or crackle. My breath started to come out in short bursts. I was worried I might be spooking myself. But the cold was real. I pulled out the thermometer again. It read 58 degrees this time. I didn't have a good explanation for why it was dropping further. Eventually, I decided I had enough for one night. I took the elevator back down and tried to push it out of my mind. The next day, I had an HVAC technician check the system. We went floor by floor. He inspected vents in the central unit in the basement. Everything looked normal. He walked up to the fourth floor with me carrying some tools. He felt the chill too. He said, "That's weird. All the vents are set the same. There's no separate zone that should be making this area colder." He used his own thermometer, and it read around 59 or 60 degrees. He couldn't figure out why. The best guess he had was that maybe some insulation had failed behind the walls, allowing outside air to seep in. But the building's outer structure looked intact. No cracks in the exterior walls, at least none we could see from inside. He left, saying he'd have to come back with more equipment another day. Residents kept asking me about it. Some were just curious. Others seemed nervous. One person told me they heard the popping noises in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep. Another said they felt like something was off when they walked from the elevator to their door. I tried to reassure everyone that I was on top of it. I posted a notice in the lobby that an HVAC inspection was ongoing. But the feeling in the building changed a bit, especially among the folks on the 4th floor. It's not a huge building, but people talk. The rumor about the old fire came up again. An older story said that the corridor had once been sealed for repairs for months. Some say they felt this cold in small bursts for years. Others said they never noticed it until now. I decided to spend more time on the 4th floor at night. I went up there around 11 p.m. with a flashlight, even though the lights were on. I just wanted to check behind the baseboards or any corner that might hide a crack. I started near the elevator, ran the beam of light along the trim, looking for signs of damage or discoloration. I moved slowly, feeling the cold sink deeper into my arms and legs. I stopped every so often to listen. The corridor was quiet. Then, about a third of the way down, I heard that cracking sound again. It was sharper this time. I knelt down, pressed my ear near the baseboard. I heard a soft rattle inside the wall like something was shifting. My breath felt heavy. I wasn't exactly scared, but my nerves were on edge. I tapped on the wall lightly to see if anything would move. It was solid. The popping stopped for a while. Then, a minute or two later, I heard a faint click behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight in that direction. Nothing was there, just the empty corridor. My legs felt a little shaky, probably from crouching too long in the cold. I stood up and kept going. Each door I passed, I listened to see if the noise got louder or quieter. It stayed consistent, like little random sparks of sound. No pattern, no location that seemed to be the main source. It was all around me in that hallway. I checked the small laundry room at the end of the corridor. The temperature was cold in there too, but no weird sounds. The machines were off for the night, so it was silent. I turned back and glanced at the corridor from that end. It looked normal. Just the same dull walls, the same lights. But I felt tense. My arms had goosebumps, and not just from the cold. My stomach was knotted. I remember thinking, I wish I knew what the hell is going on in these walls. I stayed there until about midnight. A few residents passed by, saw me with the flashlight. They asked if everything was okay. I just said I was doing a check for structural issues. They looked uneasy but kept walking. None of them stayed around to chat. I couldn't blame them. It was late, and I probably looked like I was hunting for something. After a while, I packed up and went back down to my office on the 1st floor. Over the next few days, I spoke with a few more people. Mr. Ramirez mentioned more about the old repairs. He said the corridor had been gutted decades ago, but he never heard if they replaced the insulation. He also said some people believe the corridor was always doomed to be cold. I asked if he remembered any official reports from the building's archives. He said he wasn't sure. So I checked the storage room in the basement, where we keep old documents and architectural plans. I found some paperwork about the repairs. There was a mention of extensive damage to the corridor walls, something about a problem with the wiring at the time. The repairs looked standard on paper. There was no note about missing insulation or anything that would explain such a large drop in temperature. I tried contacting a general contractor to come out and do a more thorough inspection. He said he could come in a week or so. Meanwhile, the temperature issue persisted. Every time I walked up there, it felt like stepping into a refrigerator. The crackling noises continued, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but they never completely disappeared. Some nights I'd go up around 9 or 10 p.m. and it would be completely silent for a few minutes, and then out of nowhere, I'd hear a pop near the ceiling or a faint series of clicks in the wall. At one point, I even tried turning off all the breakers for the lights in that corridor for a few minutes to see if it was an electrical noise, but the sound kept happening in the dark. I stood there with just a flashlight, feeling the chill. My heart was pounding a bit harder than usual. It's an unsettling feeling to stand alone in that cold, silent hallway at night. Every small sound makes you jump. My breathing echoed in my ears. My skin felt clammy, and my fingers trembled. I told myself it was just the cold affecting my nerves. Every day I'd update the residents about my progress. I told them the contractor was on his way, that we'd figure it out, that there was no danger to them. Most seemed to accept that. A few insisted that there had to be some hidden structural problem. Others believed the cold was some leftover effect from the old fire. I didn't want to dismiss any theories out of hand, but I was trying to stay rational. There had to be a physical explanation. The strangest part was that the cold never spread to the other floors. The 5th and 6th floors above it were normal. The 3rd floor below was normal. Even the apartments on the 4th floor themselves seemed okay once you entered them. The cold stayed in the hallway. It was like an invisible barrier at each apartment door. You'd step inside someone's unit, and the temperature would be the usual 72 or 73. Step back into the corridor and it dropped by over 10 degrees. That sharp difference made me realize this wasn't some minor draft. It was concentrated in the hallway. By the time the contractor arrived, I had a thick folder of notes. Temperature readings from different days and times, notes on the popping sounds, the old building documents. He brought in a thermal imaging camera to check for insulation gaps. We walked around for an hour. He found a few small spots near the ceiling that were slightly cooler, but nothing that could account for the entire corridor dropping so many degrees. He was puzzled. He said, "This is unusual. Maybe something behind these walls is pulling in outside air, but I can't see any sign of that on the camera." He recommended opening up a small section of the wall to inspect, but that would require approval from the building's board. I made a note to bring it up in the next meeting. Meanwhile, the popping noises kept happening. Residents got used to them in a way, though it still bothered some folks, especially at night. They'd walk quickly to their doors, not wanting to linger in that corridor. I kept hearing random stories. Some said they felt like the floor was colder in the center, while others claimed they heard the sounds near the corners. I tried to pin down a location, but it shifted. Sometimes I'd hear it on one end, sometimes near the elevator. There was never a single focal point. I started feeling a bit worn out from all the late-night checks. I'd come home to my own apartment in the building and feel tense. My shoulders ached. My hands sometimes felt stiff from staying in that cold environment. I got in the habit of carrying a jacket just to go to that floor. It didn't help that people's stories about the old corridor repairs circulated. I tried to focus on facts, the temperature reading, the lack of any visible damage, the possibility of hidden structural issues. In the end, I presented the contractor's findings to the board. We plan to open a small section of the wall soon, near the utility closet, to see if there's some unknown gap or a hidden duct or pipe that's causing this. Until then, the corridor remains the coldest part of the building. The popping noises come and go. Some folks swear it sounds like burning embers or a faint crackle of something that's not quite gone. Others say it's just the building settling. I still visit the corridor almost every day. Each time the temperature reads about 60, sometimes 58. It doesn't matter if it's hot outside or if the rest of the building is toasty. I step out of the elevator and feel that chill creep into my bones. The air feels denser. My breath feels heavier. I check around, see nothing strange, then leave. There's no easy explanation yet, but I haven't given up. I'm just waiting for permission to open up the wall and see what's really back there. Until that happens, the 4th floor corridor stays cold, with those odd clicks and pops echoing in the night. That's the situation. That's all I know. And it's enough to make me uneasy every time I ride that elevator up to the 4th floor. I never believed in strange forces or anything like that. I always rolled my eyes when people talked about haunted rooms or eerie vibes. That changed one morning when I stood in front of the office door on the 2nd floor of my house and found it stuck. That moment still sends shivers through my arms when I think about it. I live alone, so there's nobody else to blame for what happened. Yet, I can't find a rational explanation. I bought this house a few years ago. It's a simple two-story place. The bottom floor has a living room, a kitchen, and a small bathroom under the stairs. The top floor has 2 bedrooms and a hallway that splits off to a narrow storage closet at the far end. The first bedroom is where I sleep. The second bedroom was supposed to be a guest room, but I turned it into my home office. I work from home most of the time, so I spend hours in there. From the day I moved in, that second bedroom felt off. I can't describe it in fancy words. All I know is that the moment I step inside, something in the air feels heavier. The smell is different too. It's not a bad smell. It's more like the air is stale or old. I keep the window open whenever I can, but that strange feeling never goes away. I tried rearranging the furniture to see if it improved anything. I painted the walls a lighter color. I swapped out the ceiling light. Nothing changed that heavy atmosphere. Despite my discomfort, I continued to use that room because I needed a workspace. Over time, I got used to the feeling of unease. I'd sit at my desk, stare at my computer, and focus on my tasks. Eventually, I hardly noticed the weird vibe. Until that morning. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had a meeting scheduled for 10 in the morning and I wanted to get some coffee before settling at my desk. I climbed the stairs around 8. My routine is pretty standard. I wake up, make breakfast, eat in the kitchen, then head upstairs to work. That day I felt normal. My night's sleep had been okay. I wasn't anxious or anything. I reached the top of the stairs, turned left, and walked toward my office door. I tried the doorknob and it didn't budge. At first I thought the latch might have jammed. The lock is the simple kind that you can twist from the inside. I stood there for a second, jiggling the handle. Nothing. I checked to see if I had accidentally locked it, but the lock wasn't engaged. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't open. It felt like something was blocking it from the other side. My first thought was that maybe I had dropped something behind the door the night before, but I knew I hadn't. I like to keep the room tidy, so I never leave boxes or heavy items by the door. I pushed a bit harder, giving the door a nudge with my shoulder. Still no movement. I took a step back, gripped the handle, and forced it with more pressure. Then I heard it, a scraping sound like heavy furniture dragging across the floor. That noise made my heart pound. It was a single, drawn-out scrape, the kind of sound you'd get if someone took a solid wood wardrobe and slid it a foot across the floor. I felt my stomach tighten. My mouth went dry. There was no reason for that sound to happen. Nobody else was in the house. I didn't own any large pets. I'm not the kind of person who keeps a random cat locked in a room. There was nothing that should have been moving in there. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to pick up any more sounds. It was dead silent. I remember standing there with my pulse hammering in my ears, feeling the wood of the door cold against the side of my face. After a few seconds of silence, I decided I needed to push harder. I braced my left shoulder against the door and shoved. It gave about an inch, then stopped. The scraping noise came again, but this time it was more of a jolt, like something was resisting the push. I took a deep breath, set my feet, and rammed my shoulder forward. The door popped open. It didn't swing wide. It just opened enough for me to slip inside. I stumbled in, scanning the room for whatever might be inside. My eyes went straight to the big old wardrobe in the corner. It was a heavy piece of furniture that had been there since before I bought the house. It's solid, thick wood, and I only keep a few coats and some storage boxes in it. Usually, it sits flush against the far wall, just a few inches from the corner, but now it was sitting about a foot away from that spot. It looked like someone had pulled it forward so it blocked part of the door. I stood there, heart thudding, trying to make sense of it. There's no reason for that wardrobe to have moved on its own. The office floor is level. There was no earthquake. The windows were all shut. Nobody else has keys to my house. I live by myself. There were no signs of forced entry. I wanted to check for footprints or something. But I realized how silly that sounded in my head. This wasn't some detective show, yet the situation felt that bizarre. I walked around the wardrobe, reached behind it, and ran my hand along the floor. It was dusty, and my fingertips brushed over some scattered debris, but there were no clear marks or tracks. Nothing suggested that a person had come in and pushed it. I tried to shove the wardrobe back into place. I had to plant my feet and lean my entire body weight into it. The damn thing was so heavy that I strained my back just moving it a couple of inches. It took me several minutes to get it lined up against the wall again. Afterward, I was out of breath. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. My palms felt clammy. I stood there panting, staring at the wardrobe, trying to figure out what to do next. My heart was still racing, and my mind was spinning with questions. I kept looking around the room for a clue. The window was locked from the inside. My desk looked normal. My chair was in its usual spot. The computer was off, just as I had left it. Everything else seemed perfectly ordinary. I walked around, opened drawers, checked behind the desk, and looked under it. I tried to find anything that might have shifted during the night. Nothing was out of place except for that wardrobe. I kept thinking, maybe the floor is uneven, or maybe the wardrobe got knocked somehow. But I knew how heavy that thing was. Even a strong adult would have a hard time moving it alone without leaving scuff marks. After a few minutes of pacing, I realized I was shaking. My hands were trembling as I touched the edge of the desk. I told myself to calm down, but my nerves were shot. I left the room, locked the door behind me, and went downstairs. I needed coffee, but I was too uneasy to focus on anything. I ended up sitting in the living room, gripping my mug so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying that scraping sound in my mind. That's what got me the most. It wasn't just the fact that the wardrobe had moved, it was that I heard it move. That means it happened at that moment, not hours before. Something was on the other side of that door resisting me. The thought made my stomach knot up. I canceled the morning meeting and shot my boss a text, saying I had a power outage or something. I didn't want to tell him the truth. Even saying it out loud would have made me sound paranoid or crazy. Hey, my office furniture moved on its own. That wasn't something I felt comfortable sharing with anybody. I spent the rest of the day on the couch. My phone was next to me, and I caught myself typing out messages to friends, but I never sent them. I didn't know how to phrase what I experienced. I didn't want people to think I was losing it. So I just sat there staring at the TV, flipping through channels, not really paying attention to anything. My mind kept wandering upstairs to that wardrobe. When night came, I locked every door and window. I felt uneasy in my own house, which is something I had never experienced before. I was jumpy at every noise. The hum of the refrigerator made me twitch. The creaks in the walls, which I used to ignore, made me flinch. By the time I climbed into bed, my head was pounding from tension. I thought about sleeping on the couch, but I forced myself to go to my bedroom, close the door, and lock it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Every few minutes, I imagined I heard footsteps on the stairs or the shuffle of furniture. My heart would skip, and I'd hold my breath, waiting. Of course, I didn't hear anything real. It was all in my head, but I couldn't sleep much. I dozed off after midnight, woke up around 3 in the morning, and then fell back asleep just before dawn. The next day, I avoided going into that office. I had to work, but I made up some excuse to my boss, saying I had to do something off-site. My laptop was upstairs, but I didn't want to go near it. I spent most of the day on my phone and tried to distract myself with random errands. I went to the grocery store, walked around the neighborhood, and stopped by a hardware store for no particular reason. I guess I wanted to be anywhere but my house. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon. The sun was getting low. I realized I couldn't just keep running away. I needed to face the room. I needed to check if it had changed again or if everything was still in place. My heart pounded the entire walk up the stairs. My hand shook a little when I gripped the doorknob. I tested the door gently. It opened with no problem. The room looked the same as I had left it. The wardrobe was still against the wall. I flicked on the lights and looked around. Nothing seemed out of order. Still, being in there made me feel uneasy. The air was thick and my skin prickled with goosebumps. I kept the door open behind me in case I needed to bolt out. I sat at my desk, turned on my computer, and forced myself to work. My eyes darted to the wardrobe every few minutes. I kept half expecting it to shift on its own. It stayed still, of course. After about an hour, I realized I was sweating. My shirt was damp in the armpits and my face felt hot. I decided I needed a break. I went downstairs, drank some water, and tried to calm myself. Over the next few days, I continued this pattern. I'd hesitate before going into that office. I'd open the door slowly, expecting to see the furniture moved again. It never moved. But the feeling that something was watching me, or that the room itself was breathing, never went away. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake the memory of the dragging sound. Every time I heard any noise from the upstairs, like the house settling or the wind blowing, I'd freeze. Sometimes I'd go investigate, other times I tried to ignore it. But the tension stayed with me. My shoulders felt tight, and I kept clenching my jaw without realizing it. I thought about sleeping with the TV on to distract myself, but I hated that idea. I wanted to be stronger than my nerves. So I stuck to my regular routine, except I'd check the locks a few extra times before bed. I'd glance down the hallway at the office door, half expecting to see it creak open. It never did. One night I sat on my couch and forced myself to think logically. The wardrobe must have been slightly off balance. Maybe the floorboard beneath it wasn't completely flat. Perhaps temperature changes caused the wood to swell or shift. I tried to convince myself of that. But no matter how many excuses I came up with, I couldn't explain the fact that it was fully blocking the door and that I heard it move while I was pushing from the outside. At some point, I knew I had to live my life. I couldn't move out on a whim. I also couldn't avoid the office forever, so I went back to my normal schedule, turning on some music while I worked, keeping a lamp on even during the day to make the room feel less gloomy. I tried to give it a brighter atmosphere. I considered hiring someone to move the wardrobe out entirely, maybe put it in storage. But I felt weird about that, like I was admitting defeat to whatever force was in there. Or maybe I was just lazy. Either way, I left it there, pushed against the wall. Weeks passed and I managed to calm down a bit. The memory stayed with me though. Whenever I'd open the office door, my gut would tighten for a split second, reminding me of that morning. I hadn't told anyone about it yet. It felt too strange, too personal. I also didn't want people coming over, poking around, asking a bunch of questions and stirring up my anxiety. One time I did a thorough inspection of the closet in the hallway, the attic access, and the crawl space under the stairs, just to be sure there wasn't some hidden route into my house. Everything was sealed, no sign of intruders. After that, I felt slightly better, but not much. Now I still get that heavy feeling every time I'm in the office. I leave the window open when the weather's nice, hoping fresh air will help. Some days are easier than others. Sometimes I almost forget about the wardrobe incident. Other times, especially when I'm tired or on edge, I'll look at that corner and feel my heart beat faster. I'll remember the sound of it scraping across the floor. I'll remember the jolt and how I had to shoulder the door open. And I'll feel that rush of fear all over again. I don't have a neat wrap-up for this. I didn't find a hidden mechanism, a loose board, or any supernatural explanation. But I can't deny what happened. That wardrobe moved when I was on the other side of the door. It blocked me from entering, and I still don't know how. There were no footprints, no scratches on the floor, no signs of anyone else in my house. I wish I could say I'm over it, but I'm not. I'm just living with it. I guess that's all I can do. I do my work in that room because I have to. I try not to linger there after dark. Sometimes I sense that the air feels thicker than usual, and it reminds me that I might never figure out the truth. I'm doing my best to keep going, but that event changed how I see this house. It's not just an old place with creaks and drafts. It's a place that showed me that sometimes things happen that can't be explained by logic. That's my story. It's not dramatic and there's no big conclusion, but I'll never forget the day I had to force that door open and saw that damn wardrobe moved a solid 30 centimeters. It felt like something wanted me out. Or maybe it just wanted me to know it was there. I can't say for sure. All I know is that I live in this house alone, and something in that room once rearranged the furniture without my help. I still think about it every time I walk up those stairs. I was wide awake that night. I had stayed up reading and I realized I needed the bathroom. I walked out of my small room at the end of the second floor corridor, wearing just a t-shirt, sweatpants, and socks. My aunt's house always felt a little quiet at that hour. She went to bed early. Her guest room, the one she'd let me use, was at the far end of the hallway. Her bedroom was at the opposite side. A single light bulb above the stairs gave off a weak yellowish glow. I felt a slight chill in the air, but I figured it was just the temperature dropping overnight. I didn't want to turn on more lights than necessary, so I moved toward the bathroom with just that one bulb guiding me. The floor made faint creaks. I opened the bathroom door, listened for any movement in the house, and heard nothing. The pipes sometimes groaned in this place, so I waited for a second, but everything was silent. I used the bathroom quickly, rinsed my hands, and took a moment to look in the mirror. My eyes looked a bit tired. I inhaled once, trying to steady myself, then opened the door. As I stepped back into the hallway, I felt a slight draft. I don't know where it came from, but it made me shiver a little. I wanted to get back to my room right away. Then I noticed something odd. A baby stroller stood in the middle of the corridor. I recognized it immediately. My aunt had mentioned she was storing an old stroller in a locked room on the second floor. She intended to donate it to someone, but nobody had come to pick it up yet. She kept that door locked because she didn't want to clutter the house with extra items. I had never seen that stroller out in the open before, yet there it was. I froze where I stood. I listened carefully for any sounds of footsteps or movement. I heard absolutely nothing. The only thing I noticed was the mild hum of the refrigerator downstairs, or maybe it was the water heater. It was too faint to pinpoint. My mouth felt dry, and I thought for a second about calling out my aunt's name, but it was late, and she was definitely asleep. I figured maybe she changed her mind about storing the stroller and just put it out to remind herself, but she never did things like that at such a late hour. I walked closer, trying to make sense of the situation. The stroller's handle was facing me, and it looked old and a bit dusty. The seat was empty, of course. Nothing seemed unusual about it except the fact that it was in the corridor when it was supposed to be locked away. The door to the storage room was about 5 or 6 steps away from where the stroller sat. I glanced at that door. It was still closed. I reached out and tested the handle. It turned, but it was still locked. I felt uneasy. I tried to rationalize. Maybe my aunt forgot to lock it earlier, but I remembered seeing her lock it. She had used a small key on that door a few days ago, complaining that the lock was old and stiff. Now it was definitely locked. I looked back at the stroller and noticed the wheels were a bit rusted, which might explain the squeaky sound I heard, but I hadn't heard it roll out here. That was the weirdest part. I decided I should move it out of the way so I could get back to my room. I grabbed the handle, but something about it felt grimy. My fingers pressed into a sticky residue on the handle's foam grip. I pulled my hand away and wiped it on my shirt. I felt a small spike of disgust. I didn't want to deal with cleaning it at that hour, so I just gently pushed it against the wall. I told myself I would tell my aunt in the morning. Then I walked back to my own door, stepped inside, and shut it. Immediately, I felt a strange tension in my chest. I stood there, hands still on the doorknob, sensing something wasn't right. A second later, I heard the faintest squeak. It was like the sound of a rickety wheel turning. My breath caught in my throat. I waited. My heart beat faster. I heard it again. Another slow squeak. It reminded me of a shopping cart with a bad wheel, except softer. I didn't know what to do. I was torn between ignoring it and going straight to bed or opening the door to check. The curiosity and the nervous tension got the better of me. I turned the knob, pulled the door open, and leaned out. The light over the stairs was still on. I scanned the corridor. The stroller was no longer against the wall. It was now a few feet from the top of the staircase. It looked like it had been pushed. I couldn't see anyone else there. Both ends of the corridor were empty. My aunt's door was still closed. There was no sound now. I stepped back into the hallway. My heartbeat thudded in my ears and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. There was no sign of who might have moved the stroller. I approached it slowly. It sat at an odd angle, like it was about to roll down the stairs if it got pushed a bit further. The front wheels pointed toward the steps. My breath felt shallow. I took another glance around. I saw the closed doors. No lights under them. No movement. No whisper of fabric or scuff of a footstep. Nothing. Just me and that stroller. I put my hands on it again, this time more firmly. I wanted to push it back to the locked storage room and see if somehow the door would open. I gripped the handle and tried to roll it along the floor. The wheels resisted at first, squeaking loudly. Each rotation sounded like a short, high-pitched wail. It felt wrong to hear that noise echo in the quiet hallway. After a few inches, the stroller started to roll more smoothly. I brought it back near the locked door. I pressed my ear to the door, but I heard no movement inside. I didn't want to leave the stroller in the middle of the corridor again, so I kept one hand on the handle while I pulled on the storage room's doorknob. It was locked as before. I jiggled it, feeling frustration welling up. I looked back at the stroller, trying to figure out where else I could park it. The corridor was narrow. I could leave it near the wall opposite my room. But then I kept thinking about how it ended up near the stairs. That memory made me uneasy. I was worried I'd hear it move again. I wanted to secure it somehow. But there was no chain, no rope, nothing to keep it in place. I decided to wedge it against the wall right next to a small table with a lamp. I pressed the wheels against the baseboard so it wouldn't roll on its own. Then I stepped back a bit, taking a moment to observe it. The stroller stayed still. I exhaled in relief. I headed back to my room, opened the door, stepped inside, and shut it once more. I locked it this time. My aunt's guest room door had a simple push-button lock from the inside. It wasn't heavy-duty, but it made me feel a bit better. I turned off my overhead light, leaving only the soft glow from a small nightstand lamp. I sat on the bed. My mind was racing. I looked at my phone. It was almost 3 in the morning. My body felt tired, but my thoughts were swirling with questions. I tried to focus on the physical sensations. I was sweating a bit, even though the room felt chilly. My hands were trembling. My breathing felt shallow. I kept swallowing hard, like my mouth was dry. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room except for the faint light that bled in from under the door. I lay down on the bed, pulling the covers up to my chest. My ears felt more sensitive than usual. I listened for any sign of movement. The house seemed still. I forced my eyes shut, hoping to calm down. I must have drifted off for a short while because the next thing I remember was a slight tapping sound. It reminded me of a knuckle gently hitting wood. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I'd heard it in a dream. I stayed very still, trying to figure out if it was in my head. Then I heard it again, a soft tap. I felt my skin prickle. My eyes were open, but I couldn't see much. My room was nearly pitch black. I reached for my phone to check the time. It was 3:26 a.m. The tapping continued, irregular but distinct. I couldn't tell if it was at the door or somewhere on the wall. My heart pounded. I whispered to myself, "Is someone there?" But didn't speak loudly. I debated getting up to check. My mind jumped to the stroller in the hallway. I wondered if something was happening out there. The tapping stopped. The sudden silence felt like pressure on my eardrums. I stayed still, barely breathing, for what felt like a full minute. Finally, I exhaled and decided to stand up. I unlocked the door and opened it an inch, peeking into the corridor. The hallway light over the stairs still glowed. The corridor itself was empty. I opened the door wider and stepped out. I wanted to see if the stroller had moved. It hadn't. It sat in the same spot, wheels pressed against the baseboard. Nothing else seemed out of place. The house smelled a bit stale, like it always did at night when no windows were open. I listened for the tapping again. It didn't return. I took a few cautious steps toward the top of the stairs and looked down to the first floor. The living room lights were off. The front door was locked. The kitchen door was closed, too. Everything seemed normal, I rubbed my arms to warm up. The air felt colder than before. I heard a faint click somewhere behind me and turned around fast. The corridor was quiet. I looked at the locked storage door and then at my own door, which was now wide open. Nothing else. Maybe it was the old house settling. I decided I had to see if my aunt was awake. I walked to her room and listened at her door. No sound. I didn't want to wake her if she was sleeping. She's a light sleeper, and if she was up, she would have probably come out already. I felt stuck in that moment, not sure what to do. My legs felt tense and my pulse was racing. But I couldn't justify knocking on her door for something that might just be my own overreaction. I walked back to my room, staring at the stroller on the way. I half expected it to move in front of my eyes. It stayed put. I noticed the seat's fabric had a small tear near the edge. A bit of stuffing peeked out. The wheels had spots of rust and the metal frame was scratched. I felt unsettled just looking at it. Finally, I went back into my room and closed the door, leaving it unlocked this time so I wouldn't hear that loud click again. I got back into bed and stared at the ceiling. My mind wouldn't let me rest. I couldn't explain how the stroller got into the hallway or how it moved on its own. My best guess was that someone in the house had a reason to move it, but that didn't make sense given the locked storage door and the late hour. I tried to ignore it and focus on the softness of the pillow beneath my head. After maybe 15 minutes, my eyelids felt heavy. I dozed off for a while. When I woke up again, it was around 4:10 a.m. I looked at my phone in a haze. I felt stiff and thirsty. Part of me wanted to go get a glass of water, but the idea of opening the door again made my stomach twist. I lay there, hoping to drift back to sleep. My body was tired, but my nerves were on edge. I lay in silence, counting slow breaths in my head. The next hour dragged. I didn't hear any more tapping or squeaking wheels, but my sleep was shallow. I kept jolting awake at the slightest sound, like the hum of the refrigerator or the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway. Eventually, morning light seeped in through the gaps in the window shades. Around 6:30, I decided I couldn't just lie there anymore. I sat up, stretched my stiff arms, and rubbed my face. My eyes felt dry. I grabbed my phone and saw a message from a friend. I didn't feel like replying. I just needed to get out of that room, get some fresh air, and figure out what to do about the stroller situation. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The house looked more normal in daylight. The corridor had that dull light from the windows at the end of the hall. I glanced over at the spot where I'd left the stroller. It was still there, angled the same way, wheels against the baseboard. Everything looked less eerie in the daylight, but my memory of the night's events was too vivid to ignore. I walked past the stroller and went downstairs. My legs felt weak and my shoulders were tense. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water. I drank it all at once. My aunt's voice surprised me when she spoke from behind me. "You're up early," she said, sounding groggy. I turned around and saw her in her bathrobe. She was yawning, hair messy, no sign that she knew anything about the stroller. I swallowed and tried to steady my voice. "Did you move the stroller out of the storage room last night?" She frowned, shaking her head. "No, I keep that room locked. Why would I do that in the middle of the night?" She seemed genuinely confused. I told her what happened. I explained each detail, coming out of the bathroom, finding the stroller, hearing the squeaks. She stared at me like she was trying to process everything. Then she walked upstairs with me to see if the door was still locked. It was. We tried the handle, and it wouldn't budge. She pulled out her key, inserted it, and opened the door. Inside, the room was neat with cardboard boxes stacked in a corner. No other stroller. That was the only one. We returned to the hallway where the stroller sat. My aunt pushed it slightly, and it gave that same squeak. She checked it for any sign of damage. Then she shrugged and said, "I don't know how it got out. Maybe the lock malfunctioned, or maybe I left it open for a second and it rolled out somehow. I really have no idea." I didn't argue with her, but it made no sense to me. The stroller wasn't near the storage door when I first saw it. It was closer to my room, and I clearly remembered that door being locked. We spent the morning trying to figure it out. She asked if I was sure I wasn't sleepwalking, which I denied. I felt a bit insulted, but I understood her confusion. Eventually, she decided to leave the stroller in the garage until she could donate it. I helped her bring it downstairs. The wheels squeaked the whole way. Even in broad daylight, I felt uneasy touching that thing. We set it against a wall in the garage, made sure it was stable, and shut the garage door. After that, I took a shower, got dressed, and tried to go on with my day. But I kept replaying those moments in my head, the hallway at night, the sound of the wheels, and the strange feeling that someone or something had pushed that stroller. I couldn't shake the tension in my shoulders or the knot in my stomach. My aunt seemed to move on. She made breakfast, and we chatted about everyday stuff. But I noticed she didn't bring up the stroller again. It was like she preferred to forget about it. I wasn't able to forget so easily. Every time I walked up to my room, I glanced at the spot near the stairs where I'd seen it move. At night, I made sure all the doors were locked. I double-checked the storage room door with my aunt. We tested the lock to confirm it was secure. Still, for the rest of the nights I spent there, I never got the same kind of peaceful sleep. The memory of that stroller moving on its own stayed with me. I couldn't explain it, and I still can't. But I know what I saw and heard, and it still makes the hairs on my arms stand up when I think about it. I never planned to take that back road, but deadlines pushed me, and I thought I'd save time by cutting through a rural route. It was around 11 at night. I was tired, and the usual highway was packed with construction. The idea of an empty road sounded good, at least at first. I turned onto a narrow path that stretched into the dark, hoping I'd pop out the other side closer to my next destination. I drive a small sedan for work. I'm a sales rep, so I'm used to long stretches of road, fast food stops, and cheap motels. I've seen plenty of strange sights on the highway, people stumbling around, odd lights in fields, weird accidents, but I've never seen anything like what happened that night. The road was empty, and my car's headlights lit up maybe 20 feet ahead. Beyond that, there was just pitch-black darkness. On each side, I saw tall grass and some trees, almost like a tunnel. The pavement was cracked, and I felt every bump through the steering wheel. I caught myself gripping it too tight more than once. Every time I spotted a curve ahead, I slowed down, leaning forward in my seat to see better. My shoulders were tense, and my eyes kept darting to the edges of the beams where the darkness swallowed everything. I turned off my radio because I thought I'd concentrate better without noise. Without the music, the silence felt heavier. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and an occasional rattle from the loose items in my trunk. I had a thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, but I'd already drained most of it on the main highway. I started feeling restless because I still had another hour, maybe more, before I'd reach my motel. After about 20 minutes on that road, I noticed something odd. There was a soft glow ahead on the right side of the road. At first I thought it might be a street lamp, but I'd passed no other lights or poles. I caught a glimpse of a faint yellowish glow that flickered, like it was moving. My thoughts went all over the place. Maybe a house lamp, maybe a lantern. But why would there be a lantern out there? I eased off the gas, not wanting to blow past it at full speed. The glow stayed in view for a few seconds, and then it disappeared behind some trees. My heartbeat picked up, and I felt sweat on my palms. I remember wiping my right hand on my pants, trying to keep my grip from slipping on the wheel. The night was cold, but I felt that warmth that comes from adrenaline. I reached the next bend, and as I came around it, I saw the glow again, this time closer to the road. My headlights caught a shape. A man standing near the shoulder, holding something that looked like an old-fashioned lantern. He wore what appeared to be a straw hat, the kind with a circular brim, but it was hard to tell from a distance. He was motionless, just standing there, as if waiting for something. That made no sense to me. It was late, far from any houses or farms that I could see. Why would a man be out there at night waving a lantern? My mind jumped to the possibility that he needed help. Maybe his car broke down, or maybe there was an accident. I decided to slow down even more to see if he needed a ride. That's when the light dimmed, flickered again, and then stopped. I couldn't see him clearly anymore. My pulse was racing. I got that prickly feeling on my skin, like a cold wave crawling up my arms. I rolled down my window a bit, hoping to hear something, maybe the man calling for help, but all I heard was my own tires crunching small gravel. I cleared my throat and said, "Hey buddy, you all right?" Even though my voice was just in the car, it felt strange to speak in that total darkness. I inched forward, careful not to swerve. Then I saw him again, maybe 20 feet ahead to the right. This time my headlights caught his face, or at least part of it. He looked older, maybe in his 50s or 60s, with a short beard. He wore a plain shirt that might have been some dull color. He wasn't moving much, but the lantern in his hand was rocking slightly. I felt a jolt in my stomach. Something about the situation felt wrong. I can't explain it in any dramatic way. It was just a gut feeling. The man's eyes seemed distant. His stance was rigid. I thought about driving past him and not stopping, but I told myself I couldn't leave a potential hitchhiker stranded. So I pulled over, letting the car idle. My headlights bathed that patch of road in harsh white. The man stood in the beam, and the light of his lantern faded, like it was weaker compared to my headlights. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, you need something? You okay?" He didn't respond. Instead, he made a slight motion with the lantern, lifting it a bit like he was acknowledging me. Then he turned his face away from the headlights. I couldn't see his expression. My heart started pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. Something about his posture felt off. It wasn't normal. He looked stiff, almost stuck in place. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to put the car in park. I turned on my hazard lights, thinking I might get out, but a sudden shiver shot through me, and I gripped the door handle without opening it. Everything felt too still. No wind, no movement from him, just the faint hiss of my idling engine. My scalp tingled with nerves, and I kept swallowing because my mouth felt dry. I flipped on the high beams, hoping to see him better. As soon as the stronger light hit that spot, I saw nothing. He was gone. I stared at the grass and the dirt shoulder. There was no one there. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked a few times, scanning the entire area. I leaned forward, my nose practically touching the windshield. Empty road, weeds, a few trees, and a dusty ditch. No man, no lantern. My gut tightened. I thought maybe he stepped out of view, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But I was sure I'd seen someone standing right there. I rolled down my window all the way and listened. Still no sound except the low rumble of my car. I stayed like that for a few seconds, trying to piece things together. My hands started to tremble on the wheel, and I felt goosebumps on my forearms. My mind raced. I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. I'd been tired, and it was dark. Maybe my eyes turned a tree trunk or a silhouette into something else. But I'd swear he was real, holding that lantern. I'd seen details of his clothing. I looked in my side mirror and rearview mirror. Nothing. No sign of him. A surge of unease made me shift into reverse. I backed up a few feet, aiming the headlights where I'd first seen him. Nothing but grass. I backed up more, scanning the ditch and the side of the road. Still nothing. It felt like my nerves were on high alert. Every hair on my arms stood up. There was a strange silence that pressed in on me. Even my breathing sounded loud in my ears. I sat there, engine running, looking around for maybe half a minute, though it felt longer. My thoughts jumped to stories I'd heard about haunted roads or old travelers who show up at night. I didn't want to entertain those ideas, but the scene was too bizarre. I pressed the gas lightly, reversing a little farther. Then I braked hard and turned the wheel, letting my headlights sweep across the shoulder. The beams caught a few patches of tall grass, some stray rocks, and more darkness. No one was there. I exhaled, a shaky breath, and decided I'd had enough. I put the car in drive, flicked off the hazards, and started moving forward. As I pulled away, My mind was racing with questions. Did I just see a ghost? Was it some trick of the light? Could a real person vanish that fast? My chest felt tight and I rubbed my neck with one hand. I forced myself to stay focused on the road ahead because the curves were sharp. My tires crunched over uneven spots, and I tried to keep the wheel steady. I caught myself checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, convinced I'd see that lantern behind me. But I didn't see anything except the faint outline of the road. I turned on my radio again, just to break the quiet, but it only buzzed with static. That didn't help my nerves, so I turned it off. The darkness felt thicker now. My headlights seemed weaker, even though I knew they were fine. My breathing was quick and shallow. I tried to calm down by focusing on the tasks at hand. Drive straight, watch for curves, keep an eye out for animals. But my mind wouldn't let go of that image. A man in a straw hat, holding a lantern, just disappearing. I started to sweat under my collar, and I rolled the window down to get some fresh air. The cold breeze hit my face, and I realized I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles looked pale. I kept driving, glancing at the speedometer. I was going slower than usual. Part of me feared I'd see more lights up ahead or maybe catch sight of him again. The road stayed empty. After a few more miles, I noticed the pavement getting smoother, and I saw a sign indicating the next highway interchange. Relief washed over me, though I still felt jittery. Once I reached the main road, I merged onto a better lit area with a couple of streetlights near a rest stop. I pulled in, parked, and took a few moments to breathe. My hands were shaking. I looked around at the bright overhead lighting in the small parking area. A lone trucker was filling his tank at the gas pump. It was mundane, normal. But I couldn't shake the memory of that figure. My heart still pounded, and the tension in my shoulders felt like a heavy weight. I got out, stretched my legs, and walked around the car to calm down. I grabbed a bottle of water from my back seat and drank it in a few gulps. My throat was dry and the water felt good, but my nerves were still on edge. I glanced around at the few people at the rest stop. None of them looked like they'd seen anything strange. No one even glanced in my direction. I debated telling someone, but I knew it would sound crazy. I pictured myself walking up to the trucker. "Hey, you ever see a guy with a lantern on that back road?" He'd probably shrug and say no, or maybe he'd laugh. So I said nothing, just got back in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a moment. I checked the time, almost midnight. I started the car again and headed toward the motel. The rest of the drive was uneventful, just a few turns and some scattered vehicles on the highway. When I finally arrived at the motel, I parked, grabbed my suitcase, and went straight to check-in. The clerk barely looked up from his phone while giving me my key. I climbed the creaky stairs to my room and noticed my hands were still shaky. Inside the room, I flipped on all the lights and double-checked the lock on the door. I dumped my suitcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bland walls. My body felt sore, like I'd been in a minor accident. I tried to process what happened. Every time I replayed the moment I flicked on the high beams and saw the man vanish, I felt chills. Eventually, I forced myself to take a hot shower, hoping it would calm me. The water pressure was weak, but it helped some. Afterward, I lay in bed, the sheets feeling rough against my skin, thinking about that man. I wondered if I should have gotten out and looked around more carefully. But the thought of standing alone in that darkness made my heart pound again. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through social media, and tried to zone out. But nothing really distracted me. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the motel made me jump. In the morning, I packed up, left the room, and got on with my job, meeting clients, driving to the next town. That next day, I felt sluggish. My eyes kept drifting to the roadsides whenever I saw a darker stretch or a patch of tall grass. For the rest of the week, I stuck to well-lit highways, even if it added time to my travel. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't ignore the small details I'd seen. The straw hat, the old shirt, the flickering lantern light. It felt real. It didn't feel like a trick of my eyes. I wasn't sure what to believe. Weeks passed, and I kept busy with work. One day, over lunch with another rep, I almost brought it up in conversation, but stopped. I didn't want to sound like I'd lost it. The memory stayed in the back of my mind, though. Sometimes I'd replay the scene when I was alone in a hotel room at night. I'd remember how he lifted the lantern as if to say hello or get my attention. Then, in the glare of the headlights, he vanished. Even now, I'm not sure what to think. People talk about old spirits on forgotten roads. Others say it's all nonsense. I just know what I saw. Or at least what I think I saw. A man by the side of the road wearing a straw hat, swinging a lantern in that cold rural night, disappearing the second I tried to shine my lights on him. I don't travel that route anymore, and I still feel uneasy when driving late at night. Sometimes when the roads are quiet and dark, I find myself gripping the wheel tighter, half expecting to see that lantern glow again. The thought sends a chill up my neck. I push it away and focus on the pavement ahead. In the end, I can't say for sure if it was a ghost or some trick of my tired mind. All I know is that I stopped the car, saw someone, or something, standing there, and then watched it vanish. I felt the cold sweat, the rapid heartbeat, the tension in my muscles. That wasn't my imagination. That was pure fear. To this day, I still think about that moment. When I'm driving and the road feels too dark, I remember that night. I remember how he looked, how he held the lantern, and how he just disappeared like a light being switched off. Part of me wants a logical explanation, but another part of me thinks it might stay unexplained. It was a lonely road, a late hour, and something I can't fully explain. That's all I've got. And it's enough to keep me from ever taking that shortcut again. I showed up at the old hotel with a pretty casual attitude. I thought it would be a simple job. Help my cousin organize rooms, stash extra linens, and keep track of supplies. That place looked worn from the outside, with flaking paint and a sagging porch railing. But I figured it was just an old building in the countryside. I had no idea what I was getting into. By the end of my first week there, I was already sleeping with one eye open, checking doors twice and feeling a constant knot in my stomach. I never expected a quiet country attic to fill me with so much dread. I'll start from the moment I arrived. My cousin Paula greeted me with a tired smile in the hotel lobby. She had her hands full with daily tasks. The place wasn't big, maybe 10 guest rooms, a small restaurant area, and a cramped lobby. She explained that most of the storage was spread out in different spots. A couple of unused bedrooms, a back closet near the kitchen, and a large attic that ran above the entire second floor. The attic was my main target. She wanted the clutter sorted, old furniture labeled for storage or donation, and extra linens folded and kept in sealed plastic containers. It sounded boring, but I agreed to help. Paula had inherited the place from our great-aunt, and she had no idea how much junk was piled up there over the years. The first days went by without much trouble. I carried boxes of towels upstairs. I organized broken lamps in one corner and old bed frames in another. The attic itself felt heavy with dust and smelled like stale air. The lighting was terrible. 2 bare bulbs spaced far apart, leaving long shadows in every corner. I'm not a paranoid person, but something about that attic felt oppressive. The floorboards groaned under every step, and the clutter formed narrow aisles like a maze. I sometimes heard the wind creaking through the rafters, or small rustling sounds that I assumed were mice. I tried to ignore it. One evening, Paula asked me to move some extra pillows and sheets up to the attic before bed. It was already close to midnight, and I was exhausted. But I carried a laundry basket full of linens up the main staircase, past the second-floor hallway, and then into the attic stairwell. The door to the attic stuck a bit, so I gave it a firm shove. The sound echoed in the darkness. At the top of the stairs, I fumbled for the light switch. A single bulb flickered on, giving me just enough light to see a small patch of dusty floorboards. I set down the basket of linens, letting out a sigh. As I stood there, I thought I saw a shape move across the far end of the attic. I squinted, leaning forward to get a better look, but everything was still. I brushed it off as my eyes playing tricks in the dim light. I walked to the center of the attic, stepping around some old chairs and a rolled-up rug. The smell of dust hit me again. I coughed a bit and started placing the linens on a wooden table. Then I heard a creak above me, like a footstep on one of the overhead rafters. My head snapped up and I scanned the darkness. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a cat, though I hadn't seen any cats around the property. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't see anything up there, but I felt watched. I decided to look around. My flashlight was in my back pocket. I clicked it on and aimed it at the rafters. The beam was weak, but I could see a few cobwebs and some dusty planks. I didn't spot any animals. I stood there for a few seconds, holding my breath, listening. There was a shift in the shadows above me, and I thought I heard scraping sounds, like slow dragging footsteps on the wooden beams. I felt my chest tighten. My pulse jumped. The attic was so quiet that every small noise seemed amplified. I heard another creak behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight into a corner. Nothing. But I still felt something there, just out of sight. My palms started sweating. I took a step back toward the attic stairs. I thought about calling Paula, but it was late. She was probably already sleeping, and I didn't want to freak her out. I told myself to finish putting away the linens and leave. I stepped toward the table again, but the light bulb overhead flickered. My flashlight started to dim. I stared at it in frustration. The battery had been fine earlier. Then, in an instant, the flashlight died. The attic light bulb buzzed and went out. I cursed under my breath, standing in total darkness. A chill ran through me. Then I heard that noise again. Above me, closer now. Slow, deliberate scraping steps on the wooden beams. I didn't bother with the linens anymore. I rushed toward the stairs, stumbling into boxes and knocking over a small lamp. My shins hit the steps and I nearly fell. I scrambled down, hitting the walls with my hands in the dark. I felt my heart pounding. At the bottom, I slammed the attic door shut and locked it. My breathing was ragged. I didn't tell Paula about it right away. I just went to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed trying to steady my hands. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I got up early. I told Paula that I wanted to take a look in the attic during daylight, just to organize the stuff I'd dropped. I felt ridiculous. Maybe it was just my imagination, or a raccoon, or some weird echo. But my gut told me something else was up there. Paula gave me a puzzled look. She said she hadn't heard anything but told me to be careful. We both went up around 9 in the morning. The attic looked normal under the dim sunlight that came through a couple of small windows. There were dust motes in the air. I walked around, picking up the knocked-over lamp and the boxes I had stumbled into. I saw my flashlight on the floor. I picked it up, but the battery was dead. Paula asked me what had happened, and I just said I must have tripped in the dark. But I was more interested in something else I noticed near the far corner of the attic. There were footprints, bare footprints in the dust, leading from a cluster of old furniture toward the rafters. I crouched down and looked at them. They weren't huge, but definitely adult-sized. I put my hand next to one, and it matched about the length of my fingers to my wrist, maybe a bit bigger. I called Paula over. She frowned and said none of the guests should be up there, and she had no staff members who would walk around barefoot. She told me she kept the attic door locked most of the time, too. But the footprints were there, clear as day. They led toward a spot where the floor ended and exposed beams stretched across. It was a tight space near the roof, cluttered with boxes and a few crates. The footprints didn't come back. We tried to look between the boxes. We found nothing except a bunch of dust and cobwebs. I felt uneasy the whole time. After we cleaned up, Paula left to handle some front desk work. I stayed behind, checking every corner. I used a new flashlight with fresh batteries. I knocked on walls, moved crates, opened boxes. I was half expecting a person to jump out from behind a trunk, but I found no sign of anyone. I still couldn't shake that uneasy feeling, though. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a face or a figure lurking in the shadows. Later that day, I decided to search the rest of the hotel's upper floors. There weren't many places to hide. The guest rooms were small, and the closets were half empty. The hallway had two locked doors that Paula said led to small storage areas. We checked those together, and they were full of cleaning supplies and holiday decorations. No sign of anyone. I even went outside and looked around the perimeter of the building, but I didn't see footprints in the dirt or any open windows on the second floor. The attic windows were small and sealed from the inside. It didn't make sense. That evening, I sat in the lobby with Paula. We went over the day's tasks. She told me a few guests had checked in, but none seemed suspicious. We had a couple from out of state and an older couple from a nearby town. We also had one man who was there on business, but he looked normal enough. Shirt, tie, worn briefcase. Paula joked about my nervous expression. I tried to laugh it off, but my mind kept going back to those bare footprints. My stomach felt tight. My shoulders were tense. I decided I would do one more pass at the attic that night, but this time I wanted to be prepared. Around 10 p.m., and after the guests went to their rooms, I grabbed a heavier flashlight, a spare set of batteries, and a portable lantern from the supply closet. I also took a small wooden stick, about the length of my forearm, just in case I needed to pry something open or defend myself. Paula thought I was being paranoid, but she didn't stop me. I told her to listen for any noise and call me if she heard something weird. I went upstairs. The hallway was quiet. The old floorboards creaked under my feet. I unlocked the attic door and stepped in. I placed the lantern on the floor near the entrance and turned it on. Its glow reached about 10 feet, enough to see the immediate area. I clicked on the flashlight and aimed it around, methodically checking the corners. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. I moved slowly between the stacks of furniture. The dust swirled around my legs. I listened for any scraping or movement. For the first few minutes it was silent, except for the occasional settling of the building. I moved farther in, toward the far side where I had seen the footprints. I looked down, searching for new prints. I didn't see any fresh ones, but the old ones were still there, faint but visible in the dust. They led to the same cluster of crates. I held my breath and shined the flashlight between the crates. Nothing but shadows. I crouched down, peering into a gap. I reached in with the stick, nudging a few boxes aside. It revealed only more dust. My pulse slowed a bit. Maybe it really was my imagination. Maybe some maintenance worker had come up months ago, barefoot for some odd reason, and left those prints. I started feeling silly. Then I heard a muffled shuffling sound overhead. It was the same slow, dragging sound I'd heard the night before. My muscles tensed. I stood up, aiming the flashlight at the rafters. The roof beams looked empty. I took a step back, trying to get a better angle. That's when I heard a soft thump behind me. I spun around, shining the light at a tall wardrobe. It was old, with chipped paint and a mirror on the door. It stood near the corner of the attic. Nothing seemed out of place, but I was sure I heard something move over there. I swallowed hard. I walked to the wardrobe, bracing myself. I grabbed the handle. It felt cold in my hand. I pulled the door open. Inside, I found a few old coats on hangers. I pushed them aside. Nothing behind them but the wooden back of the wardrobe. I stepped away, breathing a little easier, but not by much. Then the attic light bulb flickered again. My lantern stayed steady, but the overhead light sputtered, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. I pressed my lips together, listening. Another scrape came from above, then a long, low creak. It sounded like someone was shifting their weight on the beams. I aimed my flashlight up there again, stepping to the side to see if there was a hatch or an opening to another space. The beams just ran across the length of the roof. I saw a small vent at the far end, but it looked too narrow for anyone to fit through. The scraping continued for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. My hands started to shake. I realized I was sweating despite the cool attic air. My mind raced. I wondered if some stranger was living in the attic's hidden corners, slipping around at night. But how did they get in and out? And why barefoot? I took another slow walk around the perimeter, checking every stack of boxes. I felt the same prickling sensation on my skin, like someone was watching me, but nothing jumped out. Finally, I decided it was enough for one night. I walked back to the stairwell, picked up my lantern, and locked the attic door behind me again. I didn't see or hear anything else on my way downstairs. I told Paula about the sounds, but she just gave me a worried expression and said she would keep an ear out. The next morning I went up again at dawn. I didn't want to give whatever was up there time to hide. I checked the dust for new footprints, but everything looked the same. No new tracks. The old ones were even more faded. The rest of the day I spent around the hotel asking the few staff members if they'd noticed anything unusual. They all said no. A maintenance guy told me the attic had some holes in the roof, and sometimes raccoons got in, but he hadn't seen any signs of large animals. For the rest of the week I avoided going to the attic at night. I organized it in the daytime with Paula nearby. We put away the rest of the linens and labeled boxes. The atmosphere felt tense, but we never saw more footprints or heard more scraping. I still felt uneasy every time I saw the bare beams overhead. I sometimes caught a faint scuffling sound, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or just my imagination. On my last night before I headed back home, I stood in the hotel lobby with Paula. We talked about the weird events. She said she might hire someone to check the attic thoroughly, seal any openings, or install better lighting. I told her that was a good idea. I couldn't explain the footprints, but I knew what I heard. I knew something was up there that night, watching me. I can still picture that dark corner, the soft dragging of what sounded like human footsteps, and the shape I thought I saw near the rafters. Even now, when I think about it, my stomach tightens. I remember how my flashlight died at the worst possible moment, how every hair on my body stood on end, and how I felt like someone was behind me in the darkness. I don't have a neat conclusion to the story. Nobody died, nobody got hurt, and no missing persons showed up. But those footprints didn't appear on their own. That slow, shuffling noise didn't come from the wind. I don't know who was up there or why. I just know I'm not going back in that attic alone, especially not at night. And if Paula wants me to move more boxes or store more linens up there, she'll need to bring a bright set of lamps and a locked door behind us, because I'm not taking any chances again. I still remember the morning I heard my own name on that deserted dirt road. Even today, when I think about it, my heart beats faster, and my palms get sweaty. I want to share what happened in a straightforward way, the way I'd tell someone face to face if they asked me why I never walk alone before sunrise anymore. I lived in a small town with just a few stores, a single gas station, and a church at the center. I worked at a nearby farm that sat a couple of miles outside town. I was used to getting up before dawn because my job required an early start. The farmhands would arrive before the sun showed up, and most days I liked to be there on time or even a bit early. It felt good to start the day with the cool air and the quiet of the country. Until that day, I never thought much about the risks of walking alone on an empty road. I walked this dirt road every weekday. There were no houses between the town's edge and the farm. It was just hard-packed dirt with dry grass on the sides. Sometimes the grass grew taller than my knees, especially after the rainy season. But on this particular day, it was about waist-high in most spots. There were patches of wild bushes scattered around, and every now and then I'd spot a leaning fence post or a broken sign. I never saw many animals besides the occasional stray dog or a couple of field mice darting across my path. I remember that morning was especially dark. The moon was out of sight, or maybe it was behind some clouds. I couldn't see much more than a few feet ahead, so I used a small flashlight to light my way. I held it tight, keeping the beam pointed down at the road. The air felt damp, and my shirt clung to my back. There wasn't a single breeze. It was so quiet that I could hear my own footsteps against the dirt, crunching softly with each step. I also heard my breathing, which sounded louder in the stillness. I was moving at my usual pace, trying not to think about how dark it was. I was telling myself that I'd be at the farm in about 20 minutes. Then, I heard someone say my name. It sounded like it came from the grass on my right. My first thought was that maybe another worker had left earlier than usual, or it could have been a neighbor on his way somewhere. People in small towns often know each other, so I thought maybe it was a familiar voice, but I didn't recognize the tone. It was slow and clear, like the person was being careful to pronounce my name perfectly. I stopped walking. My flashlight shook a bit because my hand tensed up. I stood there and looked around. I could only see shapes in the tall grass, but everything was dark. There was no light besides my flashlight, and I couldn't see any movement. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I tried to calm myself by thinking of normal explanations. Maybe someone had a problem and needed help. So I said in a loud voice, "Who's there?" My voice cracked a little. It sounded strange, echoing in the quiet. I waited a few seconds, holding my breath. There was no answer. I stood there for what felt like a long time, but it was probably just a moment. I didn't hear anything else, just the faint rustle of grass. I thought maybe I imagined it. Sometimes when it's too quiet, you start hearing things, or your mind plays tricks. So I told myself that. I shook off the weird feeling, adjusted my bag, and started walking again. My feet felt heavier. My throat was dry, and I noticed sweat dripping down the side of my face even though the air was cool. I moved faster, keeping my eyes straight ahead. But then I heard it again. It was my name, this time closer, like the person was only a few steps away in the grass. The voice was the same, careful and slow, not loud, but forceful. I stopped again. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. This time I didn't ask who it was, I just froze and tried to see any figure in the grass. The flashlight beam cut across the road and into the weeds, but I couldn't spot a person or an animal. Everything looked still. My heart pounded even harder. My breathing got shallow, my legs felt weak, and I had the urge to turn around and run back to town. But the farm was closer than my house at that point, so I just stared for a second. I remember my mouth went dry and I could barely swallow. A wave of chills ran over my body. The voice wasn't shouting or whispering. It was calm, but it felt wrong. My instincts told me that something was off, like I shouldn't be there. The hair on my arm stood up. I gripped the flashlight so tight my knuckles hurt. Then I heard a slight rustle in the grass, like someone shifting their weight. It was enough to break me out of my frozen state. I bolted. I didn't care about the dirt kicking up on my boots or the jarring bounce of my bag on my shoulder. I ran as fast as I could, trying not to trip on the uneven ground. My lungs burned almost immediately because I wasn't used to sprinting that early in the morning. But I couldn't stop. My mind was racing, going over questions I couldn't answer. Who would be out there calling my name at that hour? Why weren't they answering me when I asked who they were? As I ran, I held the flashlight in front of me, but it shook too much to see anything clearly. My eyes watered from the strain of looking into the darkness. My chest felt tight from fear and lack of oxygen. My heart kept pounding, and my legs started to ache. I thought I could hear footsteps behind me, but maybe that was just my own echo. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. Something told me not to check if I was being followed. I just wanted to keep moving and get to the farm, where I knew there would be lights and people. I reached a bend in the road that signaled I was almost there. The farm entrance was about 50 yards after the bend. I remember the relief that hit me when I saw the faint glow of the farm's security lights. Even though it was still dark, those lights were enough to make me slow down a bit. My chest was tight. I was gasping for air, and my leg muscles felt like they were burning. I forced myself to keep a steady jog until I passed through the old wooden gate. When I got onto the farm property, I finally allowed myself to look back. I shone my flashlight behind me, but there was just the empty road leading to the bend. I didn't see anyone. The grass stood still on both sides of the path. When I made it to the main barn, I leaned against the wooden wall and tried to steady my breathing. One of the other workers, a guy named Mark, was there feeding some of the animals. He saw me panting and asked if I was okay. I told him I thought I heard someone calling me on the road, but he just shrugged. He said he hadn't passed anyone on his way in, and he had arrived only 10 minutes earlier. He used a bike to get to work and usually took a different route. He looked at me like I might be losing my mind, but he didn't say that out loud. He just offered me some water, which I drank in big gulps. We went on to do our work. The whole day, though, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Every time I walked near the barn door or glanced out at the road, I expected to see some figure standing by the gate. My hands trembled a little as I performed my tasks like feeding the livestock and loading equipment. My coworkers noticed I was jumpy, but I didn't explain much more. I only said I had a close call with someone or something on the road. That evening, when the shift ended, a friend offered me a ride home on the back of his pickup. I accepted right away. There was no way I was going to walk that dirt path after sundown. The memory of that voice was stuck in my head. I kept replaying it and trying to figure out who it might have belonged to. It was a man's voice, I think, but the clarity of it was eerie. It had no accent or drawl. Most people in town had a certain way of speaking, but that voice was too measured. I thought about it all night and barely slept. The next morning I woke up a bit later than usual and considered taking a bus or catching a ride from a neighbor. But the bus didn't run that early and I didn't have many neighbors willing to drive me. I decided to wait until the sun was almost up. By that time, it was bright enough to see down the road. I kept looking for footprints or trampled grass by the spot where I'd heard my name, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. It was just the same grass, the same dirt, and the same open stretch of nothing. For a few days after that, I still felt uneasy whenever I was on that road. I'd keep my ears open for any sound. My senses were on high alert, and every little rustle made me jump. But I never heard the voice again. There was no evidence that anyone had been out there. No one I asked mentioned walking that road at that hour. My coworkers thought maybe I'd been spooked by an animal, or maybe I was just exhausted and imagined it. I didn't buy that. I know what I heard. It wasn't a random noise or an animal call. Someone or something clearly spoke my name. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. And it happened twice. That second time it was much closer, like the person had moved through the grass to get near me. I can't explain it, and I won't try to make sense of it anymore. All I know is it happened, and it shook me up enough that I never want to repeat that experience. From that day on, I changed my routine. I got a cheap bike with a little headlamp. I started leaving my house a bit later, closer to sunrise, and I rode quickly, making sure I stayed in the middle of the road. I felt safer on a bike because I could move faster, and I didn't have to walk with only a flashlight. Even so, I'd feel that tension in my shoulders and a tightness in my chest whenever I passed that part of the road. I'd catch myself speeding up, almost holding my breath, waiting to hear that voice again. It never came. Sometimes people ask why I'm so particular about not heading out too early in the dark. I've told the story to a few close friends. Most people just give me a confused look or tease me about being scared of ghosts. I don't care about that. I know what I heard, and I know the jolt of fear that tore through me. It wasn't just a weird sound, it was my name, spoken clearly. Now, whenever I pass by that spot in daylight, I notice how normal it looks. It's just overgrown grass, a few weeds, and a couple of broken fence posts. There's nothing special about it. No sign, no marker, nothing that would suggest something unusual happened there. But I can't forget that morning. I can't forget how my body froze or how my flashlight beam showed me absolutely nothing, even though I felt someone watching me. And I can't forget that second call, closer than the first. It makes the hairs on my arms stand up just thinking about it. I still work at the same farm and I still live in the same small town. Nothing else strange has happened, at least not to me, and not on that road. But I stick to my decision. I never walk out there alone before sunrise anymore. If someone offered me $100 to do it, I'd say no. That 30-second moment of sheer panic was enough to change how I see that place. Some folks might say I overreacted. Others might come up with a logical reason for what I heard. I don't argue about it. I know my own experiences. There's a part of me that wants an explanation, but the bigger part of me doesn't care. If I'm being honest, I'd rather not know who or what was in that grass. I'll keep doing my job and living my life. That one morning was all it took for me to set some personal boundaries. It's a simple rule. No more wandering around in the dark by myself, at least not in that area. I still feel a chill when I pass the spot, even in daylight. Sometimes I look at the grass, half expecting it to move or reveal some hidden shape, but it never does. That's the whole story. I was out there, I heard my name. I ran. I got to the farm, and I was safe. I don't know who or what called me, and I don't want to find out. That's all there is to it. I never expected a brownish stain on my bedroom ceiling to ruin my nights, but the first time I saw it, I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I was brushing my teeth in the evening. I walked into my room and noticed a patch of dull, dirty-looking brown near the corner of the ceiling. It wasn't very large, maybe the size of my hand. I looked around for any sign of a leak. The walls were dry. There was no dripping sound. I got a chair, climbed up, and ran my hand over the spot. It felt cool, but I couldn't detect any moisture. I went to bed thinking it was just some weird discoloration or maybe old paint. I didn't give it much thought until I realized it was getting bigger every night. The next day, I woke up and checked the stain again. It looked the same size as before, so I shrugged and got ready for work. When I came home that evening, it appeared a bit darker. I turned on the overhead light, stared up at it, and tried to see if it had spread. The edges seemed fuzzy, like it wasn't just a perfect circle. It bothered me, but I had dinner to cook, so I left it alone for a while. Around 10 p.m., right before going to bed, I looked at the ceiling again. That's when I noticed something that made my heart pound. The outline looked vaguely like a person. I could see a curve that resembled a shoulder or an arm. My pulse sped up. I stood on my bed to get a closer look. The shape didn't smell like mold. It didn't feel wet. It was just a darker shade of brown in that odd outline. I lay down, staring at it, waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure what I expected, but my thoughts were racing. Eventually, I dozed off. I woke up at around 3 a.m., feeling heavy in my chest. The room was quiet, but I swear I felt a tight pressure around me. My forehead was damp with sweat, and my throat felt dry. I opened my eyes and looked right at the ceiling. The shape seemed bigger. It was definitely larger than before. I got this prickly sensation across my skin, like my body knew something was off. I flipped on the lamp by my bed. The light revealed the same humanoid outline, only now it extended a few more inches toward the center of the room. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I felt uneasy, like I wasn't alone. I sat up, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself I was imagining things. Eventually, I lay back down and forced myself to sleep. In the morning, it looked smaller again, almost back to the size of my hand. For a week, this pattern repeated. Each night, the shape appeared to stretch out. By morning, it would shrink. I called a friend who knows a bit about home repairs. He came over during the day, took one glance at the spot, and told me it looked like a mild stain, probably from old water damage. I shook my head and explained that it kept changing size. He didn't believe me, but he offered to bring a moisture meter another day. We tested it together, but it showed no sign of water infiltration. The drywall felt solid. There was no moldy smell. He left, looking puzzled. I felt frustrated because I still had no explanation. I called a professional leak specialist the following Monday. He showed up with his equipment, scanned the pipes, checked the attic, and couldn't find anything. He walked around the house, tapping on walls and listening for hollow spots. Nothing turned up. He told me, "Maybe it's just a cosmetic stain. Patch it up." But I told him it was changing shape at night. He just shrugged. When he left, I felt more uneasy. I was on my own with this weird phenomenon. Over the next few nights, the stain continued to shift. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up feeling a heavy sensation in the air. I'd sit up and see the outline stretch closer to where I was lying. My skin would break into goosebumps. My mouth would go dry. My heart would thump so loudly in my ears that I was sure someone outside could hear it. I tried to ignore the urge to panic. I'd switch on the lamp, watch the shape, and it would stay there, unmoving. Then, a few hours later, I'd check again, and it might be a bit smaller, or sometimes it stayed the same. After a few days, it would fade entirely until there was no trace left. I would breathe a sigh of relief. I thought it was over. But then, maybe 2 weeks later, the stain would appear again in a slightly different corner of the ceiling. I started losing sleep. I tried to record the changes by taking pictures, but the difference in size wasn't always obvious in the photos. I tried to mark the edges on the ceiling with small pieces of transparent tape, but that felt a little too weird, and the tape didn't stick very well to the paint. I became jumpy and tense. Small noises in the night, like the refrigerator humming or a branch tapping the window, made me flinch. I kept checking the ceiling like it was some kind of threat. I never saw it move in real time, but every time I looked at it, it seemed a bit different. Sometimes the head portion looked bigger, or the arm shape became more defined, but if I stared too long, I started doubting my own eyes, like I was looking for details that might not be there. Still, the feeling of weight in the air at night was too strong to be my imagination. My chest felt tight and I had trouble breathing, as if the oxygen in the room was thinner. One night, after a long day at work, I decided to stay up and watch it. I brewed coffee around 11 p.m. and set up a chair where I had a clear view of the ceiling. I kept the main light off, leaving only a table lamp on. I wanted my eyes to adjust to the dark, thinking maybe I'd see a change if I looked carefully. My legs felt restless and I kept shifting in the chair. Around midnight, I noticed the edges of the stain looked darker. It seemed to grow outward at a slow pace, like an expanding shadow. No noise accompanied this change. It was just a gradual extension across the white ceiling. It formed what looked like a broad shoulder on one side and a narrow arm on the other. My breathing grew shallow. My heart hammered in my chest. My hands felt cold, but my forehead was hot. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and splashed water on my face. When I returned, I could swear it had grown another inch or so. I felt my stomach churn. It was late, and I was jumpy. I turned on the overhead light, hoping it would stop. Nothing happened. It stayed there, the same shape. I turned the light off again, and it kept me company for the rest of the night. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted. I lay on my bed, facing the stain. My eyelids grew heavy, but every time I felt myself drifting off, I jolted awake and looked at the shape again. In my half-asleep state, I thought I saw it move. I felt the air turn thick. I could feel my heart rate spike. My breathing got ragged. My mind raced. I was thinking, is this a ghost? Is it a trick of the light? Am I dreaming? But everything felt too real. My sheets were damp from my sweat, and my back was tense. I kept my eyes on the ceiling until they burned. I must have dozed off around 4 a.m. When my alarm went off at 7, the shape was smaller, just like before. I went through the day in a fog. Work was a blur. My coworkers asked if I was okay. I just told them I had trouble sleeping. I couldn't tell them about a mysterious human-shaped stain. It sounded ridiculous even to me. That evening, I checked the ceiling the moment I got home. The stain hadn't returned yet. I felt relief, but it was mixed with a strange disappointment, like I wanted proof of what I was experiencing. Around 9 p.m., I glanced up and saw it again, faint at first. But there, I cussed under my breath. My chest tightened as I realized another night of tension was ahead. I started thinking of other possible explanations. Could it be some chemical reaction in the paint? Could it be the light from outside casting a shape? But the blinds were closed, and it happened every night regardless of any outside lights. I even tried shining a flashlight on it, but all I saw was that dull brown color. I considered painting over it, but I worried that wouldn't solve the problem, and something about it felt bigger than just paint. It felt like it was connected to the atmosphere of the room, feeding on my unease. Eventually, I decided to stay at a friend's apartment for a few days to see if the stain would appear or disappear while I wasn't around. I slept on his couch for 3 nights. When I returned, I walked into my bedroom. The ceiling looked clean. There was no sign of that brownish outline. I laughed out of relief. I felt tension leaving my shoulders. That night, I slept without waking up. No heaviness, no weird shapes. I thought it was over for good. But a month later, I spotted a new stain near the center of the ceiling. Same color, same gradual shift at night. This time, I tried to ignore it. I avoided looking at it directly. I played music before bed, wore headphones, and kept my lights on until I was too tired to keep my eyes open. One night, I felt the same heavy air wash over me around 2 a.m. I turned over in bed, stared at the shape, and felt my pulse spike. My scalp tingled with anxiety. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I got up, pulled out my phone, and started recording a video. I aimed the camera at the ceiling for a good 10 minutes, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The shape stayed still. My arms got tired and I turned off the recording. When I played it back, I saw the stain, but it looked exactly the same from start to finish. I felt a sharp wave of frustration. It wasn't showing the changes on camera. I tried to sleep again, but that oppressive heaviness wouldn't let up. My chest felt tight and my head pounded. It was a silent kind of force, like the air was loaded with pressure. I tossed and turned, and every time I looked up, the shape seemed a bit larger. By morning, it was faint, like a coffee spill that dried up. By the next evening, it was gone. I just stood there, staring at that patch of ceiling, feeling drained and confused. It's happened a few more times since then. Each time the stain appears in some corner or section of the ceiling, forms a rough human outline, then disappears after a few days. No one else has witnessed it change shape. The leak specialist found nothing. My friend thinks I'm exaggerating. I've even thought about moving out, but that seems extreme. Instead, I've tried to accept that this weird occurrence might come and go without any real explanation. It's not attacking me. It doesn't cause physical harm. But the feeling it brings is unsettling enough that I dread the sight of that brownish spot. I've tried everything I can think of to document it. I've taken photos, videos, and written down notes about the times it appears, but nothing captures the slow expansion or the heavy sensation that fills the room. I wish I could show proof to someone who knows more about this stuff, but all they see is a small patch of brown on a white ceiling. They don't feel the pressure in the air. They don't notice how the shape shifts during the night. They don't wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding like a drum, convinced something is watching from above. For now, I'm stuck with this bizarre situation. I fall asleep every night wondering if I'll wake up to that shape in the middle of the ceiling again. Sometimes weeks go by with no sign of it. Other times it returns after just a few days. I can't predict it. I can only respond with the same tense routine. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, feel my pulse hammering, wipe the sweat from my face and hope it's not bigger than the night before. There's no blood, no actual violence, no children involved, and no one has died. It's just a stain that seems to come from nowhere and fade without a trace. But it disturbs my sleep and floods me with dread every time it appears. I've never believed in ghosts or other supernatural events, but I don't have a better explanation. I only know what I see with my own eyes and feel in my own body. That's enough to keep me on edge. I just want a normal night of rest, free from this bizarre presence. Yet every time I get comfortable, I catch a glimpse of that brownish patch reappearing, and I tense up all over again.